Okay, at 6 o'clock, we'll go ahead and call the work session for February 28th for Hudsonville Public Schools to order. Thanks for being here, everyone. Looks like all board members are present this evening on a late winter or early spring, however you look at it, beautiful evening this evening. First off, I'll ask for approval of the agenda, please. Motion? Motion by Mark, support from Dawn. Any questions, comments, clarifications on the agenda? Okay, all in favor of the motion, please say yes.
Yes.
Opposed, no. Motion carried. Next up, we have recognition of visitors and hearing of people present. I believe we have 2 individuals to address the board this evening. Again, we have a new venue here this evening. We're not in the auditorium, obviously, a little bit more conducive to interaction and to work session sort of topics. So those who would like to address the board, please stand at your seat this time. We don't have a podium. And 3 minutes, please, address comments to the board. And first up, we have Gwen Snowing.
Right here.
There we are.
Good evening.
Good evening.
On February 10, Abby Labarge shared about her very happy, successful high school years here at Hudsonville. My immediate thought was, hey, that's what we all want. She was ashamed that she didn't grasp all of the darker aspects of life until she got to her college years. And she's determined that her middle school students must read books that teach students the tough realities of life. And my question is, why? It's middle school. Isn't it normal to grow up in college? I had breast cancer when our youngest daughter was a high school senior. I had radical surgery. Do you think I made sure that she knew every detail so that she could understand the tough realities of my life and try to meet my needs? No. You know that our 7th grade sex education classes include instruction on oral sex, anal sex, masturbation, and sexting. 7th graders are 12 and 13. You know that a third of the January survey given to our 6th graders focused on asking how much risk or harm is there in trying marijuana once or twice, smoking marijuana once or twice a week, having 5 or more alcoholic drinks once or twice a week, or using electronic vapor products or e-cigarettes such as Juul, Vuse, Mark 10, or Blue. Why are we asking our 11 and 12-year-olds these questions? In the 5th grade SEL curriculum, this book, The Other Boy, is a recommended read aloud. The main character is a 12-year-old girl trying to live as a boy. It explains the process of transitioning, binding her breasts, wearing a sock in her shorts to portray a penis, ongoing counseling appointments, how to get testosterone shots, the uncomfortable problem of telling the girl that you have a crush on that you aren't actually a boy, and the heroine friend who gives major support is a boy who has transitioned into a girl. Do hundreds of Hudsonville 10-year-olds need this information? And who decides that they do? I don't know where the clock is. Oh, I'm winding down. At one of the January meetings, Ann Armstrong shared that 44,000 children have gone missing from Michigan public schools without explanation. I believe the explanation for many of these missing children is that parents do not want their children hypersexualized, desensitized to drugs and alcohol, saturated with depressing and hopeless thoughts and literature, and alienated from their parents. It's a very old truth that you reap what you sow. Let's stop cultivating children's responsibility for adult troubles, and let's get back to focusing on facts and truth. Let's return to the positive, hope-filled school days that blessed Abby Labarge and thousands of children like her.
Thank you for your comments. Next up, we have Aaron Greedy. Aaron?
Greetings, board, administrators, everybody. At a previous board meeting, it was suggested that everyone look into the ruler curriculum, so I did just that. Shout out to all the admin building people that helped make that happen. And kind of was a scattered day for me, but that's here or there. I will say that I reviewed every page of that thing, and it was wonderful. There is a few, I think someone mentioned, deep topics, one of them being foster care. I have a background dealing with that kind of work. So I decided to update my stats and find out, according to the Michigan, or the Ottawa County Health and Human Services data analyst who talked to the state analysts, within Ottawa County as of January, we had 87 kids in foster care. If you are unfamiliar with this kind of feel, there's ebbs and flows because of holidays and good feelings. So between youth homelessness as well as foster care and mental health intake, that kind of thing. If we have 87 in January, we are going to have way more of that later on in life, or later on in the calendar. So 87 is like, oh, that's a low number. Well, that's a horrible number to have that high, but it's low for the calendar. And the average age of that is 10 years old. So that's 10-year-olds that would be in grade 4 and 5, which is exactly where that's at in that curriculum. That's wonderful. There's been talk about trans issues, like the book that was just mentioned. That is every major pediatric organization says trans youth and trans affirming healthcare saves lives. I've said it here before, you've heard me say it before. If you're paying attention to what's going on in Texas, obviously Texas is not here, but you've heard and seen the American Academy of Pediatrics come out and say, puberty blockers, real, good thing, reversible. Having representation, good, real, important. Children saves lives. And that's all around that same time frame, that age group. So it is important, it is life-saving, it is life-affirming that we have those positive depictions, that reinforcement, that acknowledgement that yes, you are a 10-year-old and you are in a bad situation, but that does not make you bad. You are a 13-year-old who is confused and trying to figure out what your identity is. That's okay, we can work through that. But just blanketly saying no leads to lost lives of children. So I appreciate all of the admin and teachers. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your comments. Okay, next we move on to we have Representative Slagh with us here this evening to provide some comments regarding, oh, there he is, okay, to provide some comments on what's happening in the state legislature. So, and then this is outside the public comments, so in case there were any questions that the board had for Representative Slagh, who is here, you have that opportunity as well. So, thanks for being here.
Thank you, and appreciate you giving me just a couple minutes. What I would like to do is just give you a couple little high-level things from Lansing, and then make sure I do open it up, and I'll write down your questions and get back to you, because I probably won't know the answer. I'd like to be able to have all those answers. It doesn't always work like that. First would be that it's budget season, and so we're in the midst of trying to figure out, okay, where do we go with budgets? I'd love to believe that we're going to have a school budget all set and done before we get to July. I don't know that, and it is election season, so there is a desire to get something done so that they can move on and get out and hit the streets. So maybe, just maybe. One of the interesting things that's happening this week, started last week, is the Senate sent to the House a plan to actually cut the tax rate for both businesses and the personal side of income tax. Don't believe that the business side of that's going to go. Do believe that the House is going to be bringing something to the floor this week related to cutting the personal income tax rate from 4.25 down to 3.9%, which should mean that there are dollars in everybody's pocket that pays income tax for this next year. Along with that, there's also a movement to have a per-child tax credit that would be on your for those folks that are filing income tax. And it would be a additional tax credit of $500 per student or per child. So that could mean significant amounts of money for like a family of 4, as an example. Just, you know, I've been doing a little work just in digging into this snow days and what's the 75% and the cost of that and some of those kinds of things. So I've got a little better handle on that. I think you guys are all set, aren't you? Doug, where you guys are at right at the moment?
We're just fine. Our attendance rates are back up to about 95%. We never dipped below about 87. And snow days, unlike the popular demand of our kids, we have plenty of snow days left.
Way to go. At some point in time, I would be interested in chatting with you just related to the use of professional days and how you play that. But we can do that offline. That's not something for here. Just so that I understand, because it's something I've just been gaining a little information about. And then it's election season as well as we move into this time frame. And with the redistricting across the state, numbers have changed. So instead of being the 90th district representative, I'll be running for the 85th district. I intend to be there, but I obviously have to run and win first, don't I? And then that district, instead of encompassing Holland, where it did before, I now will have really much more of the people that are in your school district, in that I now have Georgetown Township that will represent in its entirety along with the city of Hudsonville. So that will change the dynamics of who and how I represent within your area as well. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions or sit down and get out of your way.
Just kind of curious as to where your colleagues are in protecting the school aid fund. I know every time there's a budget issue, there's a question about whether or not some of the funds in there can be used for other things. And just wondering if you've had frank conversations with your colleagues on that issue this year.
I have not, at this point in time, had any conversations related to that. No one has broached that subject, and so it's not hit the floor at this point.
Okay,
But I know that we need to protect it.
thank you. Appreciate that.
Similarly, maybe more of feedback and maybe a little bit of a question, but I know as we looked at what could be forecasted school budgets, the state has a little bit of a windfall this year in that there's some surplus dollars that can be allocated towards education. As we've looked at it, I think rather than having dollars come in special pools restricted to a specific purpose, I think one of the things that we've recognized is there's this long-term unfunded liability around teacher pensions. And each year a significant portion of our budget goes towards paying that down. If the state were to help pay part of that down, that would leave dollars in our budget that we could then invest as general fund dollars in our teachers' education programming. And I guess all that to say, we would advocate if there's an opportunity to help pay down that long-term liability around teacher pensions, that would allow districts to keep more dollars locally each year and put them in the schools in a less restricted way.
Okay. Good. That's very good.
Other questions, comments?
I would ask that when you get to budget season, which you're in, to think about some of those dollars and how they will be allocated. Because there's some push out there to support our students when it comes to mental health needs. And if the budget isn't finalized until June or July, it adds challenges to our human resources department to try to find people to support the needs of our kids. The sooner the better, just from a standpoint of hiring practices, because they're hard to find educators and people to do these roles. And when you get to late summer, it gets even more challenging. So I know there's time constraints, and we'd like to get you on the campaign trail too. So if you want to finalize that budget by the end of the week, as long as it's favorable, we will support that.
All right. Good deal.
Anything else? Other questions or comments?
Have you had any conversations with your colleagues regarding the teacher evaluation process and some of the legalities regarding the language and teacher evaluations? I know it came up today with Dr. Rice, state superintendent, and it's a very hot topic right now regarding what teacher evaluations look like. I don't know if you've had conversation. Maybe that's a conversation you and I can have if we connect, talking about maybe more of the professional days and some other topics that we can discuss. But
That'd be great. I know that there has been some conversation about that. And some of it's positive, some of it's negative, obviously, depending on who you talk to, right? So, but I'd be happy to talk with you about it.
maybe we can find time to talk with you.
All right. I'll try and set something up to get over to the office.
That'd be great.
All right.
Anything Anything else, anyone? Great, thank you, Representative.
Thank
We
you.
appreciate you being here this evening. Okay, next we move on to Hudsonville Education Foundation update. I see Janessa.
Hi.
Welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me. I really appreciated the opportunity to come and give an update and overview of what the Hudsonville Education Foundation has been working on. Just in review, and for those of you who may not know, the Hudsonville Education Foundation is a nonprofit 501c3 that works independently but completely in parallel with the Hudsonville Public School District. We exist for the purpose of supporting Hudsonville Public School students. Since 2003, the goal of the foundation when it was started was to enrich education in the school district by providing funding for resources, projects, and programs that encourage learning. And we've done a great job in doing that so far over the last 20 years. We'll be coming up on our 20th anniversary next year. We've been able to grant upwards of the amount of $70,000 directly into classrooms. What makes the Education Foundation unique is that, or separate from different booster clubs or individual specific building PTCs, is that we have the opportunity to invest in every student across the district. The Education Foundation really covers the entire gamut. And so in your packets, I did include just a really brief update on what our activities have been in 2020 and 2021. As you know, those were unprecedented years, and not everything went like they had in previous years. So that's just a brief synopsis of the grants that we were able to award. And that was the largest amount of grants that we have awarded in a 2-year grant cycle, upwards of $20,000, because there was need. And we were so honored to be able to meet the need with that funding. Just in case you didn't know how it operates, the foundation has an endowment. Our endowment is held at the Community Foundation Holland Zealand, and the endowment is held there for good forever, and we use the principal from that investment to then create the grants and give the grants that we give for on into perpetuity. So our goal is to raise money for that endowment. We also have an unrestricted fund, and that fund is for where needed most. So that covers operational, organizational costs, marketing, public relations, all of that good stuff. And then if there's any leftover revenue at the end of the budget year, we take a look at how much can be transferred over into that endowment so we can keep it growing. So we've been busy the last 6 months. Really, our focus has been on internal organizational excellence. I'm the first executive director that was hired about 7 months ago, even though the organization's been around for 19 years, which tells you something about the caliber of board members that we have. We are operated and governed by a set of 12 board members. They are passionate, dedicated volunteers, and you can tell that they've just done the heavy lifting for all these years until the foundation's now become, it's gotten to a point where it needed somebody to come in and manage the day-to-day operations. So it's great to have those growing pains, and I'm just honored and blessed to be the person that they chose to do that, because I get to serve in the community where my children go to school. In addition to those grants, like I said, we're looking forward to 2022 and our grant cycles. We'll do the gala again in the fall. That date is October 24th. That has been set. So mark your calendars, because we want to make sure that you're there. And with the next year being our 20th anniversary, we really hope to create more awareness around the foundation and what we do for the district, so that really with the intent to give back and invest directly back into the classroom, into those kiddos and those students. So that's, I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
I'll start off by, I mean, we just can't say enough. And you and I have talked just, for a couple of hours about how fortunate we are, how grateful we are as a district board, as a district, to have the foundation to work with, to have you as the executive director leading the foundation. It's, as you said, I mean, there's been a lot of folks that have been kind of carrying the heavy weight, and now we've reached that point where we need We need you and your skills and expertise and so forth to help lead us to that next step going into the future. So just so appreciative of the foundation, everything they've done, and the work that you've been doing as the leader now.
Thank you.
of the foundation.
We
So
are
thank you.
very appreciative for your board's investment in the foundation by providing us a liaison, a board liaison. So Mr. Mark Davis has served as that liaison. He's been a tremendous asset. And then now Dr. Barb Hooper will be the liaison, and we're looking forward to working with her, and we really appreciate that connection. Dr. Vanderjack has been outstanding. As you know, it's not easy being the new kid on the block, and everybody's just done a great job in taking me under their wing and helping get this going. So, thank you so much.
I do think it's an exciting time. You know, the foundation has been around, as you said, for years. I do appreciate the work Mark's done on the board for a long time. And I know Bart's excited to fill that role and get in that work a little bit more. But it's exciting, you know, the understanding of the foundation is kind of out there. You can ask people, do you understand, do you know? And some do, some do not. And I think the biggest mission right now is to get the awareness out there so people are aware of not only the benefit it is to our students, but to our teachers and what takes place on a day-to-day basis. And sometimes it's equally challenging right now when we're having some positive budget conversations about what's coming from the state, because we know there will be times when it might not look that way, and that's where the foundation really helps step up and says, okay, how can we help out, and what do you need from us? So it's exciting, Janessa, that you're here. I know it's been 7 months and it probably feels like a whirlwind, but for us, we're just looking forward to the next several years when it's going to look like.
Thank you.
I especially appreciate the fact that you're doing scholarships to students, because again, every little bit helps, and I think it encourages students to look beyond the colleges they might choose, and to know that there's a foundation out there that might be able to support them academically that way. I think that's a good way to also spread the word about the good the foundation's doing.
Thank you. I couldn't agree more. And one of the things that I was really excited about with the scholarships is not only does it go for a 4-year college education, but students that are looking at a 2-year skilled trades or program that they can apply for that funding as well. So that was very exciting to me.
I just want to say one of the best ways to get a sense of what this foundation is all about is to come to the annual banquet. It's a tremendous time. There's great entertainment there. We honor some of our graduates who've done very well in their lives. We honor our students. It's a great time together, so keep it in account.
We appreciate it. Thank you.
Other questions, comments? Great, thanks, Janessa, I really
Thank you.
appreciate it. Okay, next we move on to discussion items. First up, we have curriculum data review.
Sure. So yeah, tonight we'd like to spend a little bit of time over the past several weeks. Last time we met with the board, we wanted to have some further dialogue regarding some curriculum changes, potentially of bringing the ruler curriculum as an adopted curriculum to the board. We're not asking for approval tonight. We just want to share some of that data with you. Maybe have some more dialogue to give us more direction on what we'd like to see for the next time we meet, and go from there. So we've talked a little bit about some discipline data and some questions regarding that. So I'm going to ask Mandy Thomas to go through some of that. We have some data regarding what our parents provided feedback. We have some data regarding what our staff provided feedback. Mrs. Taylor's going to go through that, and then we'll go back and Mrs. Thomas is going to talk a little bit more about some of our administrative feedback. And then have some dialogue about maybe additional information you might request, or some clarification, or just some dialogue regarding some of this data. So I will turn it over. Are you going to share your screen? Am I?
I can share my screen, that's no problem.
Sounds good. So I will turn it over to Mrs. Thomas.
Sounds good. So the first data source is specific to SWIS, and SWIS is an acronym for School-Wide Information System. It's an online confidential platform where our behavioral incidences are reported. It is not the same thing as discipline data. It's really just specific to the identifying patterns in the location, the time, the place, the day, the context of where behavior is occurring. And the reason we use this platform is to help our building PBIS teams make decisions related to how they might increased preventative factors or where reteaching of behavior expectations might be needed. And so that is the data that we are sharing in the forthcoming slides. In the graphic where you see the 2 data points, the reason why September and January were selected is because January was the month where it was captured as sort of an end of month recap, and September is correlated to when the ruler units began. It is difficult to compare year to year with this data source because we've over time built continuity and consistency in terms of behavioral definitions of the major behaviors that are reported as well as the systems, and this is the first year where we have a building PBIS coach who's supporting consistent implementation of data collection and analysis. And so this data is looking at the number of occurrences that speak to inappropriate language, disrespect, defiance, insubordination, non-compliance, disruption, physical aggression, property damage, and vandalism. Property damage and vandalism is one and the same. So this is obviously aggregate information. To identify the decrease, obviously that's a celebration, but it's important to understand that there's a lot of context and other variables that have influenced this data. So one piece is that a focus of our PBIS teams is to look at their monthly snapshot data to identify how they wish to respond. So for instance, if we identify that there's a number of playground instances, that team may develop a series of reteaching expectations on the playground specifically to talk through the students what are the expectations with how games are played or how we share resources on the playground, or incentivizing, lining up on time. So there's a lot of action behind looking to see results with this data month by month. And so some of those reteaching or even just looking at what preventative strategies might be used in the school probably are a more direct correlate of why we would see decreasing scores with our Swiss data. So it's not to take away that Swiss data is a potential correlate with our ruler data. It's just that we continue to believe that when we look at sort of that real time, what are kids learning from our ruler lessons, that is, we go back to our pre-post test data. And I know that there was, a desire to see other measures of results that we could look at. And so that's the purpose of sharing this slide with you tonight. But we would continue to go back to looking at that pre-post data. And there's other ways that SEL measures can be used to identify influence, but that pre-post data really looked at our kids learning not only how to recognize the feelings, understanding how do emotions come to be, what can they tell us, what can they not tell us, how to regulate and express. And so sometimes as students build those skills, that may or may not show a difference in the behavior output that they will correlate with that data, right? So you might be working through emotional regulation, and you may never be one to show physical aggression as a result of that emotion. And so that data may or may not correlate. I apologize, I keep saying may or may not, so I don't know if I'm being clear. But what I'm trying to say is that this is one measure. We don't believe that it's probably the most direct or best measure to identify the effects of the SEL curriculum, but we do have other sources of information. So, any questions on that, please?
Mandy, have we ever looked at this data before? So sometimes things are seasonally trended too.
Yeah.
So have we looked at like 2021 versus 21, 22?
Yes. Season is a good way to describe that. So one of the things that's important for context too with this January is that our incidences of COVID were quite high, and so we had absenteeism reflected, a high number of teachers covering substitute teachers in the classroom that may or may not have received the same training. So it's difficult to compare this January to past seasons.
I think to that point also, Steve, is this is fairly new for us using the Swiss data collection. So the definitions and the teacher awareness of how to code things and how to report them, and our principals putting stuff in. I think over time, the answer is absolutely. That'll be a great indicator when we have some normalcy and we have some consistency with entering the data. So not 5 years from now, but definitely 2 to 3 years, regardless of all the other factors, this will be a good indicator of how we're trending
Sure.
with maybe not just behaviors, but to some degree responses to those behaviors.
Sure.
Go from there.
So this has been what, our third year in Swiss?
I think it's our second and a half.
Okay.
That sound about right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. We did have one, building that had used it in years prior, but, this is relatively new to be able to look at district-wide data.
Sure. Thank you.
Just for clarification, I know there's not a screen on that, but on the data, if 18 staff made a referral, and then above that, there were, let's say, 31 students, and then above that, there were a total of 73 referrals, does that mean that staff made more than one referral on one particular student?
It could be, I'm sorry, I was
Yeah,
having a hard time.
Yeah, yes. So you have a staff member, a teacher, could refer a student multiple times, so that student would show up as one student with multiple offenses with one teacher.
Okay.
You could have one teacher have multiple students with one offense, and I have one teacher, multiple students, 5 students that I'll have 5 offenses. So that's why that's exactly right.
Okay.
So, yep.
But, just in simple terms, how should I interpret this?
I think it's a celebration that we saw a decline in Swiss data that may be partially due to skills gained from SEL, but it also speaks to the work that building PBIS teams are doing to identify building trends and where they need to provide reteaching of behavioral expectations, or to look at environmental factors in the building to decrease referrals.
And just briefly, what other key variables could have influenced that downturn?
Time of year, with the number of absences or different, subs in the building. It could also, we also just know that at the beginning of the year, we anticipate that we would need to do a heavy, sort of schedule of teaching behavioral expectations, so we may see that be a higher point of the year, just like we know that between Thanksgiving and winter break could be a high period of time. And so, the conditions of time of year or level of excitement in the building can impact some of that.
Absences as well.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
We also, based on just your desire to have more information, did a number of surveys again to get some perception data. Perception data was really around looking at not only parents' awareness, but also their level of engagement with some of the resources that were being shared with them since September. So you'll see that classroom newsletters or regular teacher updates have included information related to ruler units and SEL instruction. We had 550 parents respond, and we have 71.3% of parents reporting that they have read the information related to the ruler, and almost 29% indicating that they had not read the information that had been shared. School newsletters or regular principal updates have also been in sharing information related to ruler, and again, we have the majority of parents saying that they have read the information at about 75%, and about 25% indicating that they have not read the related information that is coming home. The school home partnership letters, which really provide a unit overview, those come home as well with their child periodically, and again, we have the majority of parents indicating that they have read the school home partnership letter at about 65.5%, and about 34.5% indicating that they have not read the school home partnership letters. And then finally, how often do you and your child participate in the school home partnership activities? So in each unit, there are activities that are suggestions for parents to engage with their child about what they're learning, or any experiences that they might be having around that particular feeling word. And we have about 48% who indicate that they sometimes participate with those school home partnership activities. We have about 37.6% indicating they never do, and about 14% indicating that they often do engage in those school-home partnership activities with their children. So again, the goal was really to look at their awareness as well as their level of engagement, and that was like our families are engaging in reading the information and learning about it, as well as participating with their child in some of the school partnership activities.
Yeah, because we had looked at data previously, if I recall, around, it was similar data, around how, are parents aware of it, are they, am I thinking about that right? Yes. And and based on that recollection, these numbers seem to have have increased, is that,
Yes.
am I understanding correct? Okay.
Yes.
And part of it was the volume too. If you remember the first time we did the survey, we probably had 100 parents that responded. It was in a letter. So we sent a separate complete survey out.
Yeah,
We
that's
got a
good.
larger
Yeah.
volume, which was,
Yeah.
gives us a little bit more.
More representative.
Yeah, it's good.
How many respondents do we have on this?
550.
So, and obviously, with a survey of those questions, there's no way to really figure it out, but it'd be really interesting to know for the 37.6%. Because to me, that's who I want to see reach. I want parents to realize how important it is, not just with SEL, but with everything. That when there's handouts, there's a reason, and you and your child become a better student and parent by engaging in those conversations. And so, just an observation, I guess.
This is certainly data we can continue to collect over time too, as you I mean, it's growing, right? The conversation's growing, the dialogue is growing. It's like anything, when you first hear about it, learn about it, next thing you know, more and more people talk about it.
And you don't know if it is because they're too busy, because the child threw it in the trash, because they aren't interested. I mean, there's no way to really know.
It maybe didn't make it home. I mean, there's a lot of
Exactly.
things. Maybe a teacher didn't share some information. We've been talking, we've had those conversations too.
Yeah.
We also gathered and dug a little bit deeper into teacher perception data. So we currently have 140 general education teachers in grades K through 5. We had 115 responses, which gives us about 82% of those who received the survey responded in February to questions that I will continue with. So related to the SEL question, we really asked 3 big ideas for our teachers to respond to, what they would like to see in the district happen. So you'll see in blue that we had about 56.5% of our teachers respond that they would like to continue using the ruler curriculum and have ongoing dialogue around pacing, sequencing of units, access to resources, and supplemental materials. And so just by way of reference or comparison, that would be very similar to a rollout of any particular curriculum. Those types of nuances around pacing and sequencing, access to resources in comparison to what they've had previously, maybe in a math curriculum, for example. Those types of supports are exactly what instructional coaches support with. Professional learning occurs around rollout of curriculum, and so we're seeing that parallel here as well with the SEL curriculum. So we have 56.5% saying they'd like to continue using it, knowing that all of those regular ongoing dialogue pieces would be part of the conversation. We have 27% of our teachers reporting that they would like to begin a new curriculum selection process to identify a new curriculum to pilot next year. As you may recall in the last data piece, there were significant concern from our grade level chairs and administrators around that. I think that some of those percentages showed that there was a concern about capacity and they're already overwhelmed in doing something new. And so this question really elevates and kind of teases out maybe a little bit deeper about what they're thinking. And I'll go over some themes on the next slide about some additional thoughts that kind of go into that group. And then finally, we have 16.5% of our staff who really would like to refrain from adopting any social emotional curriculum and then not have social emotional learning lessons within the instructional day.
And here you saying the percentages roughly are broken down the same as we see in any new introduction, or the concerns are the same?
Not the percentages, but really the concerns, right? That at the onset of any new curriculum, thank you for clarifying, it's really around those types of activities, once you roll out a curriculum, are very typical in supporting teachers in ways that are meaningful to ensure fidelity of program, implementation strategies are in place, and so forth.
We don't have
Yeah.
a previous curriculum rollout that we've asked.
Yeah.
I think it's with, we've talked a little bit about this, with any curriculum rollout, there will always be a contingent that are like, I don't wanna change what I've always done,
Yep.
right? But we don't have comparable numbers to say, when we rolled out Lucy Calkins, this is what it looked like, rolled out the social studies curriculum, this is what it looked like, the
Sure.
STAR testing, this is what it looked, we don't have that data.
I know we had similar discussions when we went through years ago, curriculum alignment, and there was a strong contingency that said they didn't want to change because they want to continue the path they were on.
I would also add that not all buildings evaluated this the same, and not every grade level did. This is just the overarching numbers as they were compiled and came in. So I think you had an opportunity to see some of that. Grade level comparison, you'll notice, is on this particular graph. We have three colors, basically, three categories. So the green is really that refraining from adopting the SEL curriculum. The orange is the discontinue with ruler and begin a new selection process. And then finally, the teal or the blue is to continue ruler with the ongoing dialogue of supports and sequence. So sequencing of units and access to resources, et cetera. So you'll see that there is variability among grade levels about how they would like to proceed. And I think that speaks to our PBIS specialists and how we would envision moving forward, supporting grade levels in different ways. So by way of reminder, not only do we have a PBIS specialist that is at each individual building, but they also oversee an entire grade level. And so that provides that opportunity, for example, for one of them to be really a specialist in the 4th grade content, and then come alongside at early release when they're meeting with that grade level to support. What are the barriers that you're seeing that we can help you with? What adjustments need to be made? As an example of what we would envision moving forward with this type of data is digging a little deeper, asking some more questions, leaning in with that curiosity about what's going well and how can we support you.
I find it fascinating that at the 3rd grade level, you have the most diversification of idea or thoughts, and whether that's related to, the department, or whether it's related to the type of curriculum in that particular grade level, that would be interesting to know why that particular grade seems to be so much more diverse.
Absolutely.
And then it takes such a jump up in the 4th grade.
I think those are powerful conversations you can have as in any curriculum, you adjust it to meet the needs of the kids and the staff that's providing it. I think that's where the underlying conversations with our PBIS specialist in the building that can really help have that discussion about why 3rd and then 3rd to 4th. What does that look like? And it's just powerful conversations between a lot of educators that are doing the best they can for kids.
And then finally, there was an open comment section around benefits as well as barriers and concerns. And so these are just some overarching themes that we pulled out of those without showing you all of the comments. But some overarching themes of really the benefits are common language around the SEL concepts. And so we know that that's not only beneficial for adults as they engage with students, that common language, across the building and at recess or in the lunchroom, but that also becomes really helpful when we're talking about individuals from kindergarten to 1st grade to 2nd grade. It becomes that vertical articulation and expansion then over a period of years for that common language. Additional benefits are ruler tools, being consistent, class charter, mood meter. An example when we met with our grade level chairs was that the class charter that they anticipate will take less time next year because they will, for example, if they are 3rd grade teachers, they have 2nd graders who already went through it once, and so everybody understands what it is and they establish that. And so those are some of the factors that also have implications for time as programs or curriculum tools like this are in place. That district K-5 alignment for some of the reasons I just mentioned, other benefits, that positive classroom culture and that social benefit, building student social and emotional skill set, identifying feelings as well as regulating feelings, lots of benefit around the PBIS specialist role and support in each of our buildings, and then structured lessons with explicit instruction and the ease of use of those particular lessons. And then some of the noted barriers and concerns, time is certainly a piece of that, the length, the number of the lessons, and the fit in the instructional day. And we find that that is an important but regular conversation that we have at the elementary level about how to make it all fit. Making it fit with snow pants and boots and going to recess. And I mean, those are real conversations. As a former first grade teacher and elementary principal, they were real conversations about how do we navigate this? How do we ensure that we are balancing all that needs to happen to support students academically and socially and all of the things, if you will. The need for supplemental lessons and resources. And so I know the PBIS specialists and Mandy have been working on what that might look like and getting teacher feedback on some of those pieces, and so those plans are rolling. Other barriers and concerns are around flexibility. They really some desire to have more flexibility with pacing of units, and the desire to have more flexibility with what's taught, when it's taught, and with what resources. Couple other barriers and concerns: need to adapt to developmental or engagement levels, so supporting application, gaining familiarity because it's a new curriculum, controversy and lack of some stakeholder support, and then finally connection with SOAR and PBIS lessons. So wanting to see maybe more connection between the ruler curriculum or the lessons that are being taught in social emotional learning with the SOAR lessons that are also being taught, which are around our behavior expectation.
I think to this point, this is good feedback, right? To determine the work that we do, I'm not going to say in the off season, but ongoing. As we look through, like with any curriculum, evaluate, kind of inspect what you expect, right? And figure out what this looks like moving forward. To hear from our staff about questions that they have so that we can have that dialogue with our PBIS specialists, with our building leaders. It's just good. It's good to gather this information and to use it.
I'm a little curious with the third grade being one of them that said discontinue or refrain or pick a different tool the most. Was there any comments about in third grade we're already fighting reading aptitude and that toll gate that we don't need another thing added on?
No.
I didn't see that.
Okay.
Yeah. It's a good question though. Third grade reading. Good question.
Oh, yeah.
There were a few comments from the fifth grade teachers that brought up the core curriculum, concerns with time. Fifth, like I think 3 comments specific to fifth grade.
And that's a common dialogue, so absolutely, I'm not surprised to hear that. That is regular and ongoing, figuring out what that support looks like for teachers, so.
And what I really appreciated too about some of the teacher comments is that they clearly see the benefit of this, but then they also see that some of the, what was traditionally called the character education correlates with some of these. And I think those are legitimate things to talk about as far as flexibility and what we can tweak a little bit, and especially if they have a class where they feel like there's a particular unit that they could shorten and add some of those things in. I appreciated some of the comments around that.
Absolutely. That's a conversation I often have with teachers with rolling out any new curriculum, is we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater necessarily, but what is the guaranteed and viable curriculum across the district? And so we want to keep tools in our tool belt and use them when needed, and maybe figure out at those right moments to say, this is where we want to shift, and so let's add that at that third grade level because we find our students need that, or that's something that's missing. Those are all very real conversations that we have in all content areas, quite frankly.
What we don't know is if we change to a different curriculum, what would these numbers look like, right? That's always a challenge.
It'd be nice if we could do the little 2-month increments, but we don't have that luxury.
That would be a lot to change all the time. I don't know if our teachers would like
Yeah, I don't think it'd be very popular.
Changes.
Yep.
The last data source is from our principal team, and so in the graphic, you'll see that 87.5% or 7 of 8 elementary administrators selected that they like to see the district continue using the rural curriculum, with 1 or 12.5% indicating that they land on beginning a new curriculum selection process to identify a new curriculum to pilot for the upcoming school year. What you'll notice in themes is that there's a lot of similarities in terms of benefits. So seeing that common language be a strength or a positive, being able to have a common resource and see district alignment, the impact that it's having on a positive school culture and seeing social benefit, seeing students use this in action, building student social and emotional skill set, and the provision of tools and coaching for teachers. They spoke to some of the same barriers or concerns, time, but also noting that that's true of any new curriculum, as Amy has shared, and that evaluating the elementary day is always a challenge. And that another comment related to time is that additional time may be needed to evaluate its effectiveness and fit. Comments related to newness with any new curriculum, there's a learning curve, and that it can be challenging in the beginning to even identify where the growth points are, and so additional time related to a new curriculum may be valuable. Some spoke to context, just identifying that it's been a difficult time, a challenging year, and that we continue to see the impact of COVID, and this impacts our system and the students. And so just identifying that this could be an influence on perception, a continued need for ongoing dialogue among grade level teams to discuss pacing and adjustments, as well as seeking supplemental lessons to support some of those behavioral skills in social settings. I would say in addition to these, just some comments about, I think, speaking to understanding that beginning a new curriculum may pose more risk than benefit. I think also just starting new, what that may do for student learning as well as teacher buy-in. Understanding that the newness can't be underestimated, and that the stressors of the school year are relevant. I feel like I had, I think that's it. I think that's that kind of captures their comments. Any other questions related to principal feedback? Okay, I'll turn it back over to you.
So this is a conversation regarding the ruler curriculum that we wanted to have and share some of the data. We plan on having further discussions with the board at the next board meeting with a recommendation, and I'll share with the board. We have several options, right, and, as you well know. So we'll kind of share that with the board. If there's feedback that you have, not just tonight, but in the ongoing several days before our March 10 board meeting, that would be helpful for our team to be able to provide you the information that you need to maybe at this point to be, I'm going to say, armed enough to make a decision, but maybe not. Maybe we need to have continued dialogue. So we just want to make sure you have the information that you need to focus on. So, any questions regarding the data or where we are in the process?
Just one. So time was the most, so there was, just to give everyone an idea, there's 21 pages of teacher feedback. Time was the #1 mentioned barrier according to my ticks as I went through everything. When we talk about being a new curriculum, if there's only so many hours in the day, which is the challenge, if we don't have time, and I know even with it's new, as you continue to do it, you can maybe shorten lessons, you can figure things out, but you still only have so many hours. If there's not time, where would we take the time from? Because one teacher comment was she's doing it during the snack break. And she said, that's not good for the kids. So where has there been any discussion where the time would come from? Like, would we take a little bit of time from every course subject, or would we look at specials? I guess that's one of the questions I have, because that was mentioned by far the most.
I think time is always a challenge when it's new, right? I think it's a great question. I don't know if there's an answer to where it would come from. I think the underlying idea is, how do these lessons become part of what we do? When they're part of what we do, it doesn't pull from math or English or science or social studies. It doesn't pull from snack time or, heaven forbid, pull from recess, right? So, but it helps to understand when the teachers, when anything's new. I can tell you my first year of teaching, I would never get through my content in an hour. And by the time I got to years 2 and 3, I could teach well within the hour structure because I knew what emphasis to put on different areas. And also the kids understood year after year. I mean, you're looking at your 5th graders next year will have seen a lot of this stuff in the structure as 4th graders. So does it take as much time? Does it look like? And those are discussions we have to have. It's a question that I don't know if we have an answer for, but definitely a conversation that we have with our building principals, with our leaders from a PBIS standpoint that lead the grade levels and the buildings themselves, and to find out, quite frankly, are there lessons that maybe are taking up too much time that need to be adjusted so they're not impacting the instructional day to a large degree? Good question.
I know you looked at other curriculums as well. Any idea, did those other curriculums take the same amount of time as what this one takes, just to address that issue?
Yeah, some of the curriculums are sort of like a resource library. And so, because they don't have a recommended scope and sequence, the time is what you make of it, right? So if you prioritize that these are lessons that we need to teach, then there are a few lessons anywhere between 15 to 45 minutes. For some of the lessons that are more structured as, like, these are the units that should go in this pacing, it's not uncommon to see this range of time. So developmentally, for a lower L, to see lessons between 15 to 20 minutes, and for upper L, for that to be longer, 20 to 30 minutes. I think some of the time, like the edges of time, have to do with just the familiarity and being able to do it more effectively or with less time as you become more confident in sort of what comes next. I would say, part of your question reminded me of just something I saw too in the administrative feedback, is just kind of going back to our commitment to supporting and teaching the whole child, and that as we recognize that as an important pillar, is that we make time for that if we see there's value out there. And what we started off the year by doing is we said, as this is a new curriculum, we give really a wide range of time as anticipated. So it was something like 10 to 40 minutes a day, 4 to 5 days a week. And some teachers did report that they needed that full time, and other teachers had carved out other times of their day where it was a smaller chunk of time. So I think we've learned a lot about, like, where in the instructional day is it efficient. So some teachers that had existing, like, sort of classroom meetings at the beginning of the day, this naturally fit into that time, and so they weren't changing any other part of their day instructionally. Other teachers that had not previously had something like that, it was a shift and adjustment. But those grade level teams work together to identify what's a timetable that's going to be workable for us. And so, I would see us continue to problem solve with those teacher teams about what works best.
I don't know if this is an answerable question or not, but how many instruction hours do we have, say, in a day?
Oh Lord, I should know that off the top of my
Well,
head.
and I'm just wondering, just for perspective, if we knew how many instruction hours we have day, week, hour, slice that, and then how much this is gonna take out of that time. And I know it's a hard question because it'll be varying from class to class and time to time, but if we just have some ballpark idea, ideally, if this is implemented, how much of our instruction time does it take? Just, and not to answer, because I may be
215 total minutes in a daily schedule. And so we do provide what we call must-dos for our elementary that center around reading workshop and phonics instruction and writing workshop, and they're kind of the parameters that settle around some best practice, a number of instructional minutes, as well as align with our curriculum and align with student needs and so forth. So am I hearing you ask what percentage of the day that would be? So Dr. Bailey, that could
Yeah, and it probably, yeah, we're not running stats here, but it's a good question that maybe in a week or so we can provide that, or even at the end of the week say, this is, because it's gonna vary.
Yeah, it's not
Like
hard,
I
I know it's not a hard and fast number, but just so
Gives
we
you an
know
idea. Yeah.
about what we're talking about. For a teacher to say, I don't have time to do this, then, you know, this, how does it fit into this in an ideal world?
And you can imagine every teacher is gonna be somewhat different based on how they prepare their lessons, what their hour looks like. And,
It's more from the expectations that you would have when you start on the grade. What would your expectations be for the teacher?
we can get that.
So, very much appreciate the data, appreciate the discussion. The data I know we don't have yet, and I don't know if or how or when we'll have it, but when this was originally proposed, one of the things that really caught my attention was some of the research around the fact that pairing SEL curriculum ultimately contributes to better academic performance of students. Now, we're not doing a research study where you've got a control group and a study group, and we're not gonna have perfect data on that, but to the degree that at some point we would have data, you know, I think it gets to this discussion of what's the best way to spend time in a classroom, and is it, you know, we've heard some parents say, don't spend it on this, spend it on core curriculum. But I think we're all curious to know if the combination of this and core curriculum results in improved overall academic performance. To me, that would be very affirming data about the value of it. And I appreciate the data we have. I struggle that we don't yet have data that correlates it with academic performance in any way. So as we consider next steps, and I don't know what those options are, continue it, discontinue, continue the pilot, look for a different curriculum, you know, however we do that, I would just love to see us try to correlate it with academic performance at some point.
And that could be years, regardless of the curriculum. Right.
One other thing that I think about is, I know last board meeting, we approved a wide range of additional positions for, you know, to support students coming in the buildings. And we already have our PBIS specialists, and we have some here tonight. And that combination of the curriculum and I'll call it the social services team that we're gonna have in place, and can you do one without the other? I suspect that the answer is yes, but how do they link really is my
They link in
curiosity.
tremendous ways, so later tonight I'll dig in a little bit to Michigan's integrated continuous improvement process, but it also is greatly connected to our multi-tiered systems of support. And there's really two prongs under that multi-tiered systems of support. One is academic and one is behavioral, and so they are definitely interconnected. I think that there's an abundance of research that would say that those two are abundantly connected, and so that's where the push for multi-tiered systems of support come to play. I think from a position standpoint, so now we're talking people, right? We're not just talking theory of the system, but we're talking about the actual people. That's where we will be building not only systems, but we'll be building intentional structures to figure out how at the building level those individuals are connected to support students within some of the systems of data dialogues, and are we looking at behavioral data and academic, because what comes first, the chicken or the egg, and all of those pieces. So this is a very opportune moment for us to think systematically around structures and systems to support students in both of those.
Yeah, that's what I was getting at.
Yeah. Did I answer your question?
Well, I think what I hear you, so we're thinking about how that all links together.
Yeah.
I think we gotta figure that out, is what I'm hearing, which isn't surprising. I mean, this is all
It's a brand new
transpired in the
program,
last, month or
Right.
so.
Yep.
In addition to the program is new and our positions are gonna be new as well.
Absolutely.
So there's a lot to figure out there, but.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
and there's tremendous resources to fall back on as far as solid systems. We have many of the systems in place for MTSS, quite frankly. There's just some consistency that's needed across the district.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, but, our schedule that you had laid out, or that was laid out, talked about bringing a first reading to the board meeting on March 10th. Do I have that, is my memory correct on that, or not? And would that still be?
We were shooting for February, but we needed more data, so we
Right.
moved it back to March.
Right. Would input from the board, I think this is part of where you're going, input from the board tonight to say, yeah, let's bring that forward for a first reading on March 10. We can always decide to have a second, third, fourth, fifth reading. I mean, it doesn't have to mean we have to adopt it then. Would the board like to, and again, this isn't a vote, this is just a consensus discussion, continue down that path, or is the board kind of like, no, let's take another month or two and let's talk about first reading in the April, May timeframe? I guess I'm looking for insights from the board on that.
I'm a slow reader, I need more time to read. I will welcome another month. I'm not speaking for or against it, I just need more time.
More data, more time.
More data or more time?
Yeah.
Well, I think we've given you some data, some requests.
I think what we talked about here.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just know if there's additional, I have a couple
No,
notes
no,
here
I-
that we want to find out.
I haven't read all the materials yet, I'm just a slow reader.
We're doing on vacation.
Vacation, you got it right.
Other thoughts?
I'm not a for or against, but I have spent probably at least 6 hours looking at the feedback. I've spent a lot of time and I've created charts with the themes and what's gone well and what the barriers and concerns were. And there were 8.5 pages of barriers and concerns versus 5.5 pages of what's gone well. And so some of the things under the barriers and concerns, I would just like to have either more information on or how we could possibly address them, because other than time, the next two top things, and they were tied, and of course I'm just ticking as I'm going through, was it was not always age appropriate. That was mentioned a lot. And the next one was need more strategies. And those two tied for the number of ticks I was doing as I was going through all of this. And there's some other ones as well, like another one was they've had to supplement and modify to make it work. So I kind of get concerned when we start modifying and everyone starts to kind of do their own thing a little bit. I know there needs to be some flexibility, but I mean, they talked about adding the growth mindset, and it was mentioned a couple times. So I'll send you my 2-page document and even offline just to have more conversation on how, what would the plan be to address some of these concerns? Because there are 8.5 pages, and there were themes, so, yeah,
So if I kind of, Barb, if I kind of translate that into the question I asked, I'm hearing of let's take the time,
Yeah.
the additional time to wade into, to understand that and to appropriately address those questions that are brought up in that data that the way you cut the data, correct? Okay. So,
Would it help to have additional feedback from some of our building principals or PBIS specialists, or?
I'm mostly concerned with the teacher feedback, and it's not that the others don't matter, but the teacher feedback is the one that's got me befuddled when I see 56.5%. That's a troubling number to me. I don't know all that goes into that, but it troubles me. I'm not opposed to programs, new programs, old programs, but that's a troubling. And speaking of the staff, I know everybody's going to agree with me when I say this. Social emotional learning is more about the teacher than it is about any program. You might be surprised to know that I had some social emotional issues in high school, but it was the teachers that made the change in my life. And in my grandchildren going to Hudsonville schools, it was Larry Kappenduck who helped my grandkids without a program. So my point is, it's the staff that makes the difference. And I'm willing to withhold judgment and do more study here, but I don't want us to lose sight of the fact that this is really an HR issue. We need staff that understands kids, that loves kids, that will help them get some of their emotional issues. Program, fine, they would do that, but we need the staff.
other comments on?
And I think our staffs need to be supported to be able to understand how to do this. I think that's probably where the time factor comes in as well. that yes, you want to connect with a student, but if you're not sure how to connect with that student because you don't have a common language and your prior experience didn't deal with what we've been dealing with the last couple of years, I think that's part of what I think an SEL program can help with. So I appreciate what you're saying, because yes, the one-on-one connection between the student and teacher is invaluable. But if a teacher isn't certain how to connect because either lack of experience or change of circumstances, they need something to be able to assist with that. And that's what I see this as being a support to those teachers.
I will say one of the benefits that was mentioned frequently by the teachers is the PBIS specialist. You are mentioned very frequently in their feedback about how wonderful you are. So I would guess they would probably want more of you. I know they would want more of you. I think you're key in all of this.
Again, I'm asking the question to give the team some direction tonight. If we I guess what I'm hearing, if I can sense, and anybody who didn't comment, please chime in. But what I'm hearing is, I know we were targeting March 10 for a first read. I think I'm hearing a consensus. Again, I'm looking for yeses or nos here from the board. That let's take another month before that first read. Let's continue to collect. Nobody's saying shut it all down. We're not in favor of this. That's not the message from the board. Let's take another month, answer some of the questions that we've talked about tonight, and target April as that first read, based again on some of the further dialogue and information that we'd like to review. Is that a fair statement?
I'm certainly on board with that approach. I think the data, like Mark mentioned tonight, I'm curious the teacher feedback. Particularly we talked about the third grade compared to fourth grade feedback, and if there's any ability to dive deeper into some of that feedback. I also recognize, the curriculum, we're partway through a school year where every day of the curriculum is new for that day. And so, certainly extending another month, but part of me wonders if we ought to run a full cycle of the curriculum to understand holistically, looking at the totality of the curriculum, if a full school year of it doesn't give us a better view of it.
And time is a big one with that.
Right.
If a year from now, we're still having this dialogue about time, that to me is a caution.
How does that impact the sequencing for you, as far as when we would say, yes, go ahead, or whatever we would say, and then looking ahead to next year? I guess my only concern is I don't want to delay this too long that it creates problems for next fall.
Probably, full transparency, I'm not rushing to make decisions, but it does, it might remove that other option off the table from a training standpoint, getting people ready, the whole, if we look at something else. It just might come down to modifications with what we use or not, if that makes sense. You get, that was why the February and March timeline was original, because we have to start looking at something else. So that third option, it all depends. We have 1, 2, 3 readings that we go through, and so I don't know the answer to that. We're just,
I think
some
it's
timelines
good
that
for all
end
of
of
us
the
to
year.
keep in mind
Right.
that.
Yeah, that might change but that's okay. That's the conversation.
There would be no harm of extending the pilot.
There would not be. I mean, there are pilots that we've talked about, assessments that we've done, piloted for years. I think our social studies curriculum, we had a pilot for 3-4 years. There's not. And I also want the board to be well aware that if we institute the ruler, or we implement the ruler curriculum, and say, yep, we're going with it, we're gonna do it next year, that doesn't stop this process from saying 2 years from now, you know what, there's something else that came out that we think is better. Like with any curriculum that is approved by the board, that doesn't mean for 40 years we have to use this. There's no end timeline. So there could be something else, not to say that you can imagine people are out there wanting to come up with something new, something different, maybe something better. So it's an investment into our kids, but it also is not something that we can't look at every year, continue to study it, whether it's a pilot, whether we implement it full. I personally think that our staff needs to know that we support what they're doing. We have our instructional coaches here. We don't have any PBIS people here, I don't think, tonight. I'm looking
Sorry,
at
I said a word.
That's okay, these
Apologize,
are coaches.
apologize.
That's okay, that's okay, I was looking, I didn't
My
see back there,
mistake.
but to continue that, because this is their first year of doing this work too, and having grade level people and having building level people, because you have a building person, but then that person is also supporting the grade level across, and that's new for them too. They've been trained, but it's new, so, there is some merit to taking a look at this in full totality, in the future also. Whether it be a year or 6 months, or what does it look like? Is anything new for everybody involved, our building principals? And I know our coaches are involved too, but not to the extent maybe our PBIs.
Well, that's what I would just observe. I know it's a lot of work to go through an evaluation in an RFP, and a lot of that was done on the front end. But I also recognize that today, having had ruler for X number of months, that same group doing that same evaluation would probably be asking different questions or looking at the content through a different lens. It might be better. They might have a different assessment of how does it compare to the other options.
Yeah. That 56%, if that 56% turns into 45% next year, that's a different conversation than if it turns into 80% next year. Yep.
That's my concern is, 56.5% wanted to continue, but on the data that you sent us, if you looked at the building comparison data, it was interesting because there was 115 that responded to this 56.5, but only 104 for the building comparison, and continue based on that was only 52.8%. But then if you look at grade level, we have 108 responses, and our continue is up to 58.3. So I'm trying to figure out why people didn't ask some of
Didn't answer
these
some of the
questions.
questions.
Well,
We were wondering the same thing.
I know why for grade, because someone reached out to me and they were at a small school and they didn't want to put grade because they didn't want the feedback to get back to them. They didn't like the level of, they didn't feel that it was anonymous enough. So, but the 56.5 makes me a little.
And we don't, and it should be. I think it's a fair
You'd like to see it
question.
in the 60s.
Yeah, I want to see it
Or
in the 60s.
Yeah.
90s, to be honest with you.
Well,
Not even
but
90s, the
there's some
60s.
threshold in there.
Yeah,
And it would
56.5 is a
it would be
little
helpful if, every time we see new curriculum, I could compare that to in the past. Whether it be the work that maybe Steve mentioned from years ago, or to anything we've implemented, what's the norm, and we don't have that. Yeah.
One of the
Steve,
things I
yeah,
get
go
a
ahead.
little bit sensitive about is, we worked hard over the years to not follow the flavor of the month club. And I'm all for reevaluating things periodically, but to do it in too short of cycles is not healthy. And we found when we've done that in the past, it generally isn't have good results.
One more thing.
Yeah, it's just,
Yeah.
people get
And it's not fair to the staff because you're constantly changing things on it. And there's too many moving targets in the world today as it is.
Larry, any comments? I want to skip into this discussion. Fair enough. Okay, so again, what I think the consensus side here is, let's plan on the first reading out into April, continue on with what we're doing. Let's plan on the first reading in April. We, as Barb said, as Dawn said, we understand, we're cognizant of the impact on timing, what that may do. As Barb said, we may look at a full year pilot. I mean, we're gonna have to evaluate this a little bit as we continue on. But let's plan on that going forward as we get some of the additional information that was requested, and you get a chance to look at the analysis that Barb did, which is very good. I had a chance to take a look at it. So let's plan on that going forward, but continue on the journey, and we'll continue to keep the discussion alive and active. So, fair enough?
Thanks, Chris.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, good data collection, good sharing, good transparency. Appreciate all of that. Okay, well, this is a heck of a transition, but we go now to the Baldwin Street Middle School water heater.
Your average water heater cost.
Good.
Mr. Briggs.
So, I've got several items in a row here. I just want to acknowledge, in this particular item, Lee and his team's work to keep an old building, Baldwin, was, Baldwin came online 26 years ago, and it was really the first, replacement of the roof was the first bond project we did with this 2019 bond. So it's a little tired, and things like this are at the fail point. You'll see that as we go on through the agenda here with other items. But this, we had some issues with this 2 years ago, and you know, the domestic hot water at Baldwin, and it just, it's not worth fixing anymore. We've got an amazing partner. We've got several amazing partners in our district, but DHE is certainly one of them. They're just extremely responsive, trustworthy, and we just, this wasn't worth fixing anymore. In the packet, the proposal that we forwarded is attachment 3. They put a not to exceed price on it of $116,000. It's not a lot less, but we expect it to be $113,000. We needed, because schools need domestic hot water to be open. So we have, you've given us that power to do that in board policy. And because we needed to waive the competitive bidding requirements, we'll need to bring a resolution to do that, along with our resolution to award a contract to them at the next regular board meeting.
So this is a discussion regarding, if you have questions about how to get a water heater that's not from Lowe's or Home Depot. It's quite a bit different here. You can see the scope of what the work that needed to be done ASAP to get the building within code of being open. And then we'll bring this to the board as an action item on March 10th.
And so the work's complete.
The work's complete. Is that right, Lee? Almost?
Almost. Still having problems finding parts, frozen parts and pieces. That's next couple days.
So with it being a dual boiler system, is it capable in certain circumstances of running on a single boiler?
It should be, yes. Yep.
Yeah, big expense, and I had to just, because I know Dr. Vanderjack is interested, we put a custodian in a picture, and the holding tanks are twice the size, twice as tall as this gentleman, so, and he's not a short guy, so. It's a big system. It's a big building. Baldwin Street is bigger than most of the high schools in the state, and it's a middle school. It's large.
On behalf of all the parents of Baldwin middle schoolers, thank you for keeping school.
Thanks to Lee.
So Lee, you're all set with this? You're good with this proposal, this from DHE?
Yes.
Oh, you're good? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So we'll see this at the board meeting for a vote now.
Yes.
Any other questions on the water heater?
Our plan is to, we're gonna pay that for from the general fund.
General fund.
That budget for that.
It says control systems bid?
Yes. So, the rest of the team, we really, the entire, I would say, mechanical team of GMB, Bryce has been working on it, but Tony's here special tonight. Luke also has come out, for some of the other pieces later in the agenda, but I just want to acknowledge their work. This controls, I told Mr. Bauer on the way in, I wish I knew a tenth of as much as you know about controls. Lee and his team are very knowledgeable. Lee's got a gentleman who specializes, Scott, just in control. He's our district controls person. And Scott has worked with a lot of controls contractors, and since we undertook ControlNet on this building, well, I guess which was, we affectionately call it South 2, which is now Jamestown Lower, and current South, those buildings have ControlNet controls in them, and just can't say enough about, we just don't have controls problems there. This this contractor partner was really integral. It was one of the bedrocks of opening this building on time, because there were other contractors that were struggling when we constructed this building, and Control Net's been stellar. They're here for a lot of, they're just someone we can depend on. The bids that are in front of you came back at $5.4 million. We did award as for the initial work with the high school addition and the 5-6 building, really the biggest two projects of the 2019 bond. We awarded them a sole source contract in that for those projects. And then we had to go back and evaluate, and we did evaluate, compare them to other controls bids, their bids other places, other major controls bidders, other schools that GMB and OEK had handled, and the pricing was deemed fair that time. So we gave it, but this is different work. It's not new work. It's messier because it's a renovation. Yeah, and our original bond budget for this group of projects was $1.7 million. There has been incredible inflation in the controls arena, not just controls, but many systems, many commodities like steel, roofing insulation. But also wrapped up in this work is scope escalation, and that was driven by us. We realized that for buildings like Baldwin, things were failing. So wrapped into this price is the replacement removal of not just the thing that controls the damper, but the damper. We have dampers failing. Not just the thing that controls the actuator and the control valves, but the actual actuator and control valves. And we didn't have that in our original bond scope when we did that work. So the work of the team, and they were working this weekend, they worked on it all last week. The work of the team is really to break that out by building, that additional scope. And we're not there yet. We got a lot closer over the weekend. We're just not there yet. So since we weren't planning to bring a recommendation tonight, we just acknowledge that's additional work we have to do. I have been in the field for a few years, and I would say in the 90s and 2000s, performance contracting was very popular. Johnson Controls, Honeywell used to push performance contracting specifically for controls a great deal. They used to market those in schools. And their numbers for your return on investment, I never saw them with the presentation I saw as low as 10%. We always set the number that low, but they would say they could save you upwards of 15 and sometimes 20% on your operating costs for replacing controls, so you better control the building. Our utilities budgets for electric and gas are $1.5 million. So even if we get that low number for our district, and we have more, because I've been reminded many times we have more square feet coming online, with the 5-6 building and the additional high school space. So I'd just like to talk a little bit about scenarios, since Baldwin Street really is the building where I'm gonna say it's got the controls are in the worst shape, period, but the Bower and Park projects are really gonna be included in those projects. We've already scoped that. I mean, that's work is gonna be done when Park and Bower are renovated. Forest Grove is not. It's the first one on the list. And Georgetown is an extremely complicated system. It has heat recovery system in it. It has geothermal heat. It has in-floor heat. It's a lot. That's why the Georgetown, if you put a cost per square foot, it's by far the highest. But potential scenarios would be next month we could bring you back a recommendation that just ask for you to approve Baldwin Street and Riley Middle Schools. That's one possibility. Another possibility, since we feel Baldwin Street, we've just been getting by, literally getting by. Baldwin Street really needs to be done. Maybe it's Baldwin Street Middle School this summer in some portion of Riley South and Jamestown Lower. Because just, if you look at that price on there for South and Jamestown Lower, that's just really the head-end communication. That's not a deep, in-depth controls revision. And we know we would get savings from having those buildings on a district-wide building management system. And then there's also the option of the district could decide to do the entire project by $1 million. And then there's always some hybrid combination of all those others in between. But we just don't feel like, at least today, when I was asked this question, that a rebid would get us better pricing. And that's, you never know until you do a rebid. But generally, what people have seen in this bid climate is, I highly doubt that our current vendor would be interested in a rebid. They've given their best price, and someone else could just beat them by literally a dollar. So we're happy with them, and this is a I want to stress this is a not to exceed price, because we have all those extra valves and actuators and control and dampers included in this. They're confident they don't need to go over this price, and they've got 2 or 3 years of work built in here. This is, they really only believe they can get Baldwin Street done this summer. So we've looked at that, but I think the work of our team is really to come up and be able to tell us how much at Georgetown is cutting out dampers and valves and whatever else in the heat recovery system. How much is that work, and how much is that original scope that's in the bond budget? So
I think the main issue is, we budgeted technically 1.7 million. Inflation changed dramatically over the past 2 years. And the scope changed when you don't want to put control systems in to dampers that don't work. It just doesn't work that way. So we could try to stay closer to the 1.7 and tackle a building or two, or the major needs that I would say Lee and his team thinks we need to tackle. We could go after and just say, you know what, we got to get this done. It's going to take years anyway, and it's probably not going to get cheaper in the future. What does that look like? There will be operational cost savings when you're running a more efficient building. We don't have a number on that. I can't tell you it's going to save us $500,000 a year or $50,000 a year. But this is work that probably needs to be done. This might, like I said, we could stay closer to the 1.7 and say, okay, let's tackle what we kind of planned on. We do have, I would say, the means within our current bond to do this work without adversely affecting the work at Park and Bauer, which is still yet to be determined. But I think that's the conversation we need to have tonight, and that's the direction we're kind of looking for moving forward. Is to say, tackle what you planned on tackling, or keep it closer to the number, and let's get these buildings right, and then go after the other buildings when the time or maybe the finances are there closer to instead of a 300 and some odd % increase in what we'd originally planned.
So the type of things we would plan to do with this were included within the bond itself, just wasn't the quantity.
Yeah, we were getting new, this is a Doug version. We were getting new thermostats, but we couldn't get the furnace to turn on, if that makes, that's probably poorly, but that's my analogy of it, so. So that's what we had thought, that's all we needed to do to get a we need control of our environment so that we can effectively, it's not too cold in one room, not too hot in one room, and to do that more effectively. It's really hard to run the heat in the summer at Baldwin, and having Georgetown running some cooler air in the winter, if we can do it right. So the dampers, all the different components that were not part of the original scope, realize that it's not gonna make any sense to be able to control these buildings if we can't control the hardware that's in the buildings.
But we're authorized to use those bond funds for
That
that
is-
additional layer.
That is
Okay.
correct. That's correct.
So Lee, I know you don't like to spend money, but does it sound like it would be penny wise and pound foolish to not go beyond the scope that we initially stated?
Not go beyond the scope. I think just in my opinion, we should do the whole thing. Just comfort level is for the classrooms. I mean, we've had classrooms where the valve will fail and we can't get a valve right now, or you can't get the parts and pieces and the classroom is 60 degrees for a couple weeks, or the valve fails open and the classroom is 80 degrees. It's not a great learning environment.
Right.
What would be helpful for me is just understanding with the total bond package, where we sit with, I know those early projects came in really favorable and we thought, oh good, we're off to a great start. Now the entire construction market has changed. And it would be really helpful just in looking at the totality to know, are we making trade-off decisions like it's this or classrooms elsewhere, or it pushes things out into a future bond issue yet to be determined. Just looking at this proposal, it makes me want to have equity across the district and do it everywhere, but I don't know if by supporting that I'm making a decision to trade off something else.
Let me try to answer this without giving you all the numbers, just because they fluctuate, right? We still have contingencies on both of our major projects. We had, we basically are doing a little over $100 million worth of work. We have a little under $40 million left to do. When we bid out for the roughly $100 million, it came back very favorably, saving upwards of just over $9 million. Right, so this could come from that without affecting the classrooms at Bauer and Park. Those are our those are our next bid projects, well, a year from now. Does that mean it will affect other things that we might want to do on top of this? Maybe, but I think we have to prioritize, like Lee said, the comfort of the classroom environment as best we can, and that might mean we're not able to add on to a building if we wanted to versus needed to. I think we have everything within the scope to do this. I am not as optimistic about the climate when we go to bid in a year, but I think I'm hopeful that it'll at least be better than going to bid now.
If we were to say vote for the whole package, and they can't complete this summer only, say, 3 buildings, are they holding the prices on all the rest of the buildings until they're completed? Because to me, that seems like a huge risk. I know in our industry, we saw a 10% increase in materials just in 6 months. And to say they're gonna hold this for 3 years, it seems a bit ambitious.
Yeah, so we talked to them about that. We've got a couple ideas that help us and them, and one of them is we've had to do it to a large extent on the high school and the 5-6 building. We've been purchasing, store materials.
Okay.
And that, we mostly did that to deal with the supply chain. But we don't have to do any more stored materials than we need to, but Bryce put in the original bid documents, it's a 3-year. Yeah, it's a 3-year, and so they're gonna hold their prices, but they're when we talked about, hey, getting stuff here on time, they were very excited to have us purchase the major pieces. There are some things that are more commodity based off the shelf, but there are the specialty pieces that they're interested in doing stored materials. And with our bond, just because you have to have that, you gotta hit that 85% number, it doesn't, we're not earning yet, we're not earning huge amount on our balance, so it doesn't hurt us a ton to pay for stored materials, and it definitely gets it here.
Yeah, it's not a bad strategy right now, because we're also seeing, we have things that we're seeing 6-month lead times on, which.
When you reference that, would we do direct procurement of the materials or going through them?
No, we have, there's some weird things in school code. That it's really, if we try to direct procure, then they have to come back around. It's this odd thing that the attorneys they gotta pay sales tax, the use tax on. There's gonna be use tax in there somewhere. It's not logic, it's a political giveaway. But we don't actually get, tax-free materials when they're provided for us. Now, if we went and bought steel, Lee was gonna be, be the erector, we could do that. But when you hire, we can't beat the use tax. I know that wasn't your question,
No,
Chad.
that's exactly what my question was
Oh,
going
was it?
for,
Was
was a
it?
way to get around the use tax.
Yeah. We've been kicking the tires on that for about a month now, and it's not. There's several revenue bulletins from the Department of Treasury that say we can't do that. Or they just have to pay the tax.
Unfortunately, Rep. Slagh left tonight.
Kind of related to Steve's question, I mean, what is the timing? You look across all these buildings, is this a 2-year project, is it a 3-year, it's a 3-year project? Okay.
Why is the bus garage the only alternate?
The bus garage was so new to start, and they just added as an alternate. We didn't scope it in our original need. And we're not having problems with the bus garage. It's not a student comfort issue. We're just not at some point, we believe they can work with the communication to those devices and make them work. Their pricing here is like cutting out everything, the valve and the control. It's much more extensive than we planned, but they're just telling us, if you want to do it, this is what it's going to cost. They've given us a price.
So you're looking for direction on what to bring March 10th, right?
Yeah, just
The whole kit and caboodle, or some portion of it stay within the 1.7? Because you're bringing this on March 10th, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
I like to come to you with a recommendation, so to take that,
Right.
lift off the board, but, just tonight, I just wanted to talk to you about proposals
Yep.
and just get a sense of where the board was.
I mean, again, please chime in if I don't get this right. But I think what I'm hearing is concern over increasing component prices, labor prices, et cetera, and that if we do a portion of it now, and then you go back out for bid for the next portion and work, that you're just gonna, the whole package will end up costing us more than going out now, procuring materials, getting them in-house, and getting scheduled and underway. So again, it's not a decision tonight, it's a discussion, but I know you're looking for some consensus direction on what to bring forward. Is that fair comment on behalf of the board? Okay.
We still really want to get you, because we talked a lot about this in the past, we really want to get you the fair pricing.
Yeah.
I mean, that's part of a sole source. We feel it's our work, our due diligence to
Yeah.
do. And we don't have that by school mechanical, cut this stuff out scope yet. And the team, they're working tirelessly on it, but just don't have it yet. But,
So we may see the number change. We'll see it change on by March 10th.
yeah, this is their do not exceed. We've also worked with them, like they put in their original price, and we've got the new edition of Riley, the new wing, and we've got the new edition of Allward, and they had 100% cut everything out, and that we told them up front, and maybe that was a miss in communication. It was part of we talked to, we were doing the bond presentations, we said we weren't gonna throw away good stuff. And it's not great stuff, because it's not really the brand we want, but it's also, we built something 2016, 2017, you wouldn't expect it to be out of service yet. So,
Yeah, and I'll echo Steve's comment, a little different industry, but prices have gone up for different components of resins and so forth, and we're not expecting them to go back down.
no,
So, okay?
thank you.
One quick question, as I was scoping through here, a comment about, fire systems, devices and or upgrades not included. Do we have any concern about how old those are?
We do, I mean, we're staying up to code, and some of the systems, like, we're doing some pretty extensive work here at the high school, and we're gonna be doing pretty extensive work at Park, Forest Grove, and Bauer. Do we have any
Yes,
concerns on that?
as we have construction or add to our buildings, like Forest Grove will get a new fire alarm system, the high school will get a new fire alarm system.
So part of what we've also,
Pardon?
I'm sorry, part of what we've also bid or are working on was included, that stuff is included already.
Yes.
Gotcha, okay, thank you.
But that stuff isn't integrated into this control system, is it?
No.
Okay, all set on this one? Soil removal at 5-6 building.
Yes, so, the road, this is if you can visualize where the new 5-6 building is, there's gonna be a road that connects that, south to north, north to south, down to the Baldwin Street campus, and it goes right alongside the tennis courts. In between there, in the picture that's on the second page of the attachment, is what's affectionately known as Bolt Hill. And it's really a pile of dirt that's been moved around the campus from other construction projects. There's also soils in the middle there that have been brought in just where the ball diamonds have been constructed. And so there's really 3 different soil reports, and we threw a number on that to estimate the total cost, and it's there, and it's Bryce has been working with our current Lounsbury's, the excavating contract, it's a dirt contractor for the 5-6 building, and that's our feeling of that's gonna be a change order we need to give them to do the road. It's different in each section because the soil's really different in each section. There's a part of that where they need to bring, if you look at area 4, there's elevation changes in there, and so they had to bring sand in the original bid. So we estimated really high there. They had to bring sand in to get up to that elevation anyways. There's areas where it's clay, and Bryce has told me clay in the Hudsonville construction world is usually a really rough thing. But in this area, it's actually some of the best soils we have to work with, because it's the peat and some of the other bad soils that are in there that we really have to deal with all the natural material that we have to deal about getting it out. But yeah, that's our best estimate today. When they get into things, as we know in other areas, the number could go up. But that's 98.5 is really our estimate of what we expect at this point.
Just to be clear, this is not something that we were gonna catch earlier. This is just part of the process. When you go through and put in the road, this is part of the warning that they took now, to see where they are with the exact road code. So this is expected. It's a little bit high, but when you're going through wetlands and it's a lot of terrain over there with the hills and low-lying areas, part of the process.
I don't think we can say wetlands.
Not anymore, we purchased them, so we're okay now.
We bought credit somewhere else.
We bought credit somewhere.
Where do we sit with contingency on that?
Yeah.
project?
So, good question. So the 5-6 building, we started with a $2.4 million contingency, and we're on the ground. We paid for the under drains and all those things. We have 63% left.
Okay.
So we have $1.5 million left, at 63%. And the high school project, we started with 4.1 million, and we still have 72% left in the contingency balance. And this,
We're gonna spend it in a little bit.
yeah,
Not all of it, of course.
to your question, Chad, that this would be, come from that contingency balance.
Okay, other questions or comments on soil? At 5-6? Okay. Thank you, Pat. Next, we move on to scoreboard.
So it's time to have that discussion once again, primarily because getting to the point about, we are getting close to the point of having to order something, because of the timeline, getting that in and getting it installed. The facility is looking great, thanks to the team, not only to see Luke back there with GMB, Bryce with OAK, and obviously the work Lee's doing. But we're getting to the point where we have to make decisions about what goes into that field house. Over spring break, really the month of April, you'll see some, quite the structure start to be erecting over there where the joists going up that take, I don't know, Bryce, does it take about a day of joists to go up?
No, we do more than that.
All right, so maybe 2 joists a day?
Yeah, we'll go cook it in the pan once it's here.
Yeah, once it's here, there's a lot going on to that structure that's kind of behind us just a little bit here. So, looking at the scoreboard, we've talked a little bit about the numbers. I really want you to focus, if you can, on slide number 75, which, and I know, Luke, I guess I could throw this in here so you can see it too. This is the one that would be kind of the visual of what it would look like in the field house. And the several factors, we do believe the high definition would provide the most clarity in a very well-lit field house. We've got a lot of daylight in that area and really to show what this looks like. It's clear that we're winning the game against West Ottawa, which I think is very important, but that's not really the point. That's what the scoreboard would look like. Luke, maybe you can answer this. Is this one on the left as scale, or is it a little bit narrower? I know it's the height's about the same.
So the width is a little bit larger.
Yeah.
I think it was I want to say like a 11 foot versus a 13, just over 13 foot. So you get it's a little bit smaller, but it's not that much smaller.
Right. So looking at 4 panels to go in there, it is, I don't know the clearance from the bottom. I'm trying to visualize an inbound pass that a kid wants to try to throw a full court shot, and are they gonna have to throw it over the scoreboard to get in there? I don't think so. I think we have the distance, obviously, that we need from a volleyball standpoint and from a basketball standpoint that meets with code. But those are the two versions that we're looking at, both high definition. There's the cost difference between the two after having conversations with GMB and with OAK. They feel that the contingencies at the high school are well within the numbers based on the work that's already been done to make a decision about which board to put in there. So we are looking for feedback so that in 11 days we can bring you a proposal.
I get to the Hope College Fieldhouse, which one would be like the Hope College Fieldhouse?
Not either.
Huh?
I don't think either.
Yeah, it's just a different generation of board.
I'm thinking size.
I guess we could go there. I've not
That's
been to
right,
Hope
that's
College. It's been, graduation was the last time I think I was there.
Luke, a
Yeah, I
question,
haven't looked at it.
question based on how these are drawn. The one on the left, I feel like if you were sitting further up on the bleachers, you would be able to see underneath it across to the top where people are walking. The one to the right looks like at that same spot, you wouldn't be able to see people at that upper level.
Let me clarify the picture, only because I had the same question today when we were talking about it. The, can you see my mouse?
Mm-hmm.
Well, maybe. See it over here to the left?
Yep,
This right here is the track. Right where my mouse is moving.
okay.
That's the track. This up here is the back of the upper bleachers. So people wouldn't be walking on the back of the upper bleachers up here, but you would see them walking along the track. There's no line of sight issue with either board. If you're in the back row of the bleachers on the right-hand side, you could still see all the way across the court.
Okay.
Right.
To the
Okay.
top.
I'm looking at Luke just to
I
make
guess
sure.
I'm thinking from a security
Well,
standpoint
from,
even.
keep in mind, there are no top bleachers on the other side.
Oh, okay.
So if you are standing on the track, you can see all of the bleachers on that side, on either side. In the scoreboard, both of them do have the ability to raise and lower them to a degree, whether it's volleyball, basketball, or quite frankly, move it up into the ceiling when you have something that's not utilizing the scoreboard, like example, phys ed class.
Is the resolution identical?
They are, well, there are two different resolutions. We're recommending the higher definition, regardless of the size. So we had 4 options. We had 2 lower def, 2 higher def, and these 2 sizes. Our recommendation will still include the higher def, primarily because the daylight that's in there on a, you know, you have a fall day of volleyball when you still have some decent daylight in August or September. It could be pretty bright there, and or graduation in May.
The older I get, the more I appreciate high def. I'm a huge fan now.
And I'm assuming there's no sound system included, like there's not a speaker underneath or anything like that?
No, that's all outside of that, the lighting system, the sound system. The one thing that we would like to do, and it's not here, we'd like to put those corner panels, maybe something that has like eagles on it, maybe put a logo underneath the bottom of an eagle. So if you're, you know, a basketball player, keep in mind, this facility still has the side digital displays when it comes to the score and the game situation. So it's got the regular light bulbs, I would say. I know that's probably not what they call them, but on the side, so as an official standpoint, when you're an official or you're a player, you don't have to try to look all the way up at what's going on. You can still see the sideboards and go from there. Those are fixed to the wall.
What's the price difference?
So what's the cost?
Yeah, so it's, the cost, I think we shared that, it was about $299 for the smaller one and $465 for the larger one.
165 more.
Correct.
Do we have any?
Same
data-
score goal. We're still winning the game. I'm sorry, Steve.
Do you have any data on what life cycle costs and annual maintenance costs are projected to be?
Question. So the scoreboard would come with a maintenance package from the manufacturer for probably 5 years at least, and we can extend that as long as we want. And then life cycle is probably, I'm gonna take a guess, 10 to 20 years until it becomes obsolete with something new.
Right. And that's the advantage of maybe having something like this where you can you can replace a screen, replace a panel. Yeah.
Besides,
I know this, I just remember the last conversation we had about this. I'm waiting for Chad.
I'm just so,
Can you get it bigger
I'm
than
so
that?
Dutch, I'm trying to wrap my mind around it. Could this also be used if you're having, assemblies? Is there educational value to the ability to show educational videos?
Yes. So
and
here's one thing that we have met exclusively with our, we have met with our audiovisual consultant about, this is, so around the track, we have 6 different video ports that we're putting in, as well as, and then it all head ends as it works its way towards WCET where that's located. The idea is that we have students running this, because this is not, you know, you've got your game time person, you've got your announcer, you got somebody scoring, but then we're hoping to have kids run the system, and that could be for assemblies, it could be for any kind of activity that's taking place there, whether it be sponsors during a timeout or thing. We're not big fans of hanging banners all over that say, you know, provided by or sponsored by. But if we have video equipment in there, it's a lot easier to do game time, you know, during timeouts, during between games, things like that. But then when the day's over, the field house looks like a high school field house, not like a sponsored.
But if you're doing assemblies in there and you need to display things for the kids or graduation events, it's not just about the resolution of the replay during the game.
Yeah, I don't know how much actual replay we would put on the screen during the game. We would do more, you know, pre-game warm-up, kind of what they call pump-up videos or whatever. But you'd have on that screen, you'd have a lot of game information that your spectators can see no matter where they're sitting.
I appreciate you giving us some time frames, Luke. I guess based on what I've seen with technology, especially with anything that's video related, I'm not even sure, it won't be less than 10 years before it's outdated. So part of me says go small because we're gonna change it in 5 years anyway, but that's just me.
That's okay, that's why we're having this conversation.
Did we, beyond the contingency, did we have a placeholder in the budget outside of contingency for this as well?
Yes.
Yes.
And how much was that?
55,000.
How much?
Was it 55 or 35? 55.
Which was what, just for digital?
Yeah, it was this one right here.
Somebody with a.
It's this one right here. Fenway Park.
St. Hoosiers?
Yeah, exactly, that's what it was. No. So if you can see that, that was what was slated up there.
And it was pretty purposeful. We knew we wanted something, and we just had to, we wanted to get the best technology by as late as possible, but really, we knew to do more, so it was just a placeholder thing to just go with.
And to that point, this is another option, and then 5 years from now, or 10 years from now, when something else comes out, but we're probably gonna have this conversation every 5 years or 10 years when something's new out there. It looks like.
So 165,000, you can make a difference between the two. You can make the case that with 55,000 allocated, I mean, unless we say, no, just go back to this, just do this. So let's start with that. Let's break this down a little bit. Let's start with, that's option A, you know, that was baked in at 55,000. Here's option B. I'm gonna put the bigger and the smaller together right now, but option B is a high def screen with screens on it. Is the board aligned that we wanna go with one of these two options versus versus that? Do we wanna go with a screened, you know, an upgrade, or do we wanna go back old school? Thoughts? so I can actually see.
Yeah,
it.
it's a graduation.
So I support going with with an upgrade. That's where my head's at. Now, we can talk about which two versions of the upgrade, but I support going with an upgrade versus the board. But that's me. Other thoughts?
I'm fine with that.
All right, good.
You're fine with, I'm sorry.
Upgrade to this week.
Okay.
So we're now to this.
So now we're
conversation.
to go to
And I do think
the
it's a,
smaller versus the bigger.
it's a pretty nice field house. And it would add, it would look nice in there. So there's the two options, what it looks like from the other angle. So that maybe addresses, this is taken from kind of midway up the bleachers, not all the way in the track, pretty close.
Yep.
And then this is the same, the larger scoreboard.
If we're saying we have adequate contingency in that we would use it for educational value, turning and other large school events, I could get on board with that.
Well, I could definitely see, from an instructional standpoint, they could run their classroom, whether it's workouts, whether it's what they're doing in from PE class, instructional videos and so forth, from here, as opposed to rolling in a projector and bringing in a screen and all of those things.
We'd be having assemblies, we still have those, don't we?
We do. Yeah.
Just tough right now, it's facilities not big enough.
Right.
Have 'em all in
Yeah,
this.
they can't fit them all in the gym now, but they'll all fit in here with room. And then, yeah, you could have definitely, get kids fired up about homecoming, or do your homecoming assembly in there, get your cord on there, and recognition.
Now, again, it's different technologies, but back to Mark's point that he raised about the hope. I haven't been there in a while, so I can't envision that screen.
Is it in
But
the middle?
size-wise, I know it's a different technology, high def and so forth, but size-wise, what do they have there? Is it closer to an 8.5? So that may be something where, if you can buzz over there, or send somebody over there.
I did check with Kevin. Kevin went to work over there. He said it's just an older generation, scoreboard. Just that it doesn't have the video. He likes
Like option, like the first option. would be-
It's not
I didn't think it
that
was
far
that.
back, it's not that far back, but it just doesn't have, it's not in this generation of scoreboard.
They have a lot of animation on it, they'll show some kid scores, they'll put his picture up, it's got a lot of analysis to it there, but, I'm
Without-
more concerned about the size.
Just get an idea of the size.
Without offending you, because I know Calvin has one too.
I'm more concerned about Jemison.
Now we're getting to it.
So
Now we're
we
finally
don't have
getting
to, we do not have to worry about that.
But they get an indoor practice field, so.
They do, but we'll be all right.
So.
We can do that, before the 10th, we'll make sure we go up there and get some ideas. No, I think that's an important conversation.
Let's get the data, yeah, on that.
We do know Byron Center put up one of these boards on a wall, not a center board. And we talked a little bit about that, maybe we'll take a look, it wasn't fully operational, Luke, I don't know if it is yet, but we can get some visuals in what a single board looks like on the wall. We were not planning on putting them on the wall, but a center one would be.
You want something by March 10th, is that what you want?
We would like, if we want to get this installed when we open the facility, we need to make some of these decisions.
Well, we can get the information by March 10th.
Yeah, we can do that. Yeah, we'll bring it back to you, and hopefully I'll be able to share it with you at a time, so you have a chance to talk to it.
And, yeah, so if you get that.
Yep.
And again, I'll weigh in, I lean toward the larger, because I think there's, I can just see more benefit in that. But let's get the big information out to the rest of the board, that's what I'm at. Okay, is that good? It gives you
Yeah, and
direction to go
just to be
forward?
clear, that we would probably not be having this conversation if it wasn't for the bid climate in which we bid this project and where we are and where we've come with contingency up until now. Getting direction from our people that have kind of boots on the ground in the design and the building of it, they feel confident making this decision now is not a bad move on our part. So
To have this.
if they were saying something different, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
I understand. I think it's prudent.
To Doug's point, this would be, our intent this would be funded by that contingency.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're still not to the bid savings. Maybe a little bit deeper in the bid savings, talked about the controls, but not with this conversation.
Okay, continuing the sports theme, we got the Baldwin campus weight room.
Yeah, so this is a little bit of a more, I'm gonna try to paint this picture for you. We have to relinquish our current, fitness center, to OAK, because the parking lot needs to be installed. We can't open the field house without a parking lot. And quite frankly, the field house and the current fitness center are so close to each other that they have to do a lot of work around there. And this summer, just full transparency, it's gonna look like every parking lot on this campus is kind of exploded. There's just gonna be a lot of work being done on this campus, both in the front entryway, because that has to be completed before the connector can open, and in the back by the field house, all of that is gonna be done. So a lot of that work's taking place this summer. When we take down the current field house, we have all those racks that are not going into the fitness, the new fitness center, the field house, because we're getting new racks into the field house. Those racks we'd like to move over to the Baldwin campus. However, the Baldwin campus can only hold about 4 racks. And so we'd like to propose to expand that facility so that we have a true adequate area for our kids to use from baseball, softball, soccer, track, and football. To do that, we think we can do this from pretty much a minimal standpoint, is just basically take the far west side of the locker rooms. If you've ever been to a football game, where the locker rooms are located, the west side is where the weight room is, and if you walk in there, it looks very, yeah, it's very weathered. To move that wall out about 22 feet, and we'd be able to take the racks from the current field house and move them over there. Unfortunately, we will not be able to get this done in time to move the racks this summer, so we're gonna temporarily move them into, now this is a lot, into the current school store. So we're gonna move the school store stuff out so we can put the racks in there. We've checked the flooring. We're gonna take some of the flooring from the field house hopefully and put it in there so it's drop weighted. We're gonna take a couple of the racks and put them in this building by the pool. There's a mezzanine halfway up the stairs when you go around the corner here to the pool. We're gonna put a couple racks in there so that our kids have access to the equipment on site. So they'll use they'll use the school store for the weights. They'll use some of the freshman campus, and that will remain until the Baldwin construction could be completed. And then we'll move the racks over there at the time the field house opens, and the kids will still be on campus using the field house and go from there. To do that, we have a preliminary drawing. I would encourage, and I'll take some pictures and send it to the board. The training room in there is just not adequate. A lot of the equipment's in the hallways because they can't fit everything in there. The weights themselves, is really, they're not really salvageable. This will kind of clean up that whole area. It makes the weight room, or the training room, a little bit larger so we can put the equipment in there for our trainers to use for all the sports that take place on that campus, as well as move that wall out. We met with Mr. Farkas and Mr. Glass, our athletic director and assistant athletic director, had extensive conversations about using this facility, not just enclosed, but open it up. So we'd like to put a couple garage doors on the north and south so that when you're there, you get airflow through there. Kids are outside doing work, they're coming in. There's just a lot of, make it a really flexible space, and go from there. We do have 3 trees that are planted directly to the west that are in memory of some former students. So we're gonna work with the families on putting them in a location, making sure they're aware. We're not just gonna take the trees down and go from there. We're gonna work with the families. We met today to discuss that in more detail. So this is kind of a preliminary layout. Again, there's some visuals there. I can. Sorry. So there's the layout. What it would look like. You can see there in this visual there are 12 racks. There are 16 over at the field house, the current fitness center. 4 of them would go to the freshman campus. 12 would go here. And then you open it up, we have room for some free weights on the sides. We'll probably have a bike or two, or something for kids that need to do rehab that are there, you get injured or something. And then this yellow part is extended, from a training standpoint, the training room. The showers were most of this area, and we just moved that wall back, so there's still enough showers in there, but the training facility is almost twice the size of what, the training room's about twice the size it was before. Right now, if you, in these hallways, where my mouse is right here, and up here, there's all sorts of training equipment that they have to put out there, because there's no room, in this tight spot that they have.
So which way is north in this picture?
So north is down here where my mouse is. The football field is way up here by like the clock on my
All right,
computer. Like that.
so the
Yeah.
purple is what we're adding?
That's correct.
Okay.
This is the parking lot up here.
Okay, gotcha.
And then you have baseball and softball are
Yeah.
down in this area. Nothing's happening with the actual locker rooms. It's simply just moving that wall out about 22 feet. The sidewalk would stay where it is. It'll come probably 2-3 feet from the sidewalk. Is that pretty close? We'll go from there. We put some mirrors on the interior wall, which would be the far west wall in there. Apparently that's the thing with lifting. So we're putting some mirrors in there, and then garage doors on the top and bottom, again, to really open the space up when needed. Am I missing anything, Luke? Question. So we'd like to bring this, the intent of this project would be to maybe put some footings in this summer and try to do this work in the fall when football's done into the winter and try to get it ready to go by spring when the field house opens, move stuff over. And you can imagine, we don't want to move this equipment too much. It's pretty big equipment. It takes a lot of people to help kind of coordinate and do that, so. Yeah.
Would this come from the bond fund or sinking fund?
It's a bond, but this would be from the price, the savings. We haven't really, we haven't budgeted for this in the contingency.
Some can come from the 5-6, but most would come from the,
Yeah.
the city.
We think there'll be some, so it'll be a combination, but we just can't say if it all, we think we can contingency. Okay.
Well, the only thing I was thinking, if there was, I'm just trying to visualize where that building is and sometimes how the parking and drop off and all that happens during the game and everything else. If there's anything while we're digging there that needs to be done in that regard, I guess.
Yeah, the one thing, and I know Lee had to step out, the one thing that we've had some more conversation, you can even see it in this picture, the actual parking lot itself is, kind of needs a facelift. You can see potholes in there just from this picture, so those are conversations we would have. You can see this is the new structure here, where my mouse is moving around. That's the addition on there. You can see kind of the sidewalk here that would come out from the garage door. You also have one in the back that comes from this. We did meet today to look at more cameras in this area, not just on this facility, also on the press box as well as the concession stand. So we had some good dialogue regarding that today, and I think we have some good ideas of how to monitor. It's hard, security cameras aren't gonna deter everybody, but at least it gives us some information. If we have some kids that wanna lift weights on a Saturday at 2 a.m., they should be there.
Okay, other questions, comments? So we'll see this on March 10th as well? Okay. So any concerns about bringing this on the 10th? Okay. Next up, district storage shed.
So I know Lee had to step out. This is a project that was slated really to be done in a past bond issue. And it was cut for various reasons. I wasn't here. But the scope of this work has really changed, I would say. Initially, it was slated to go on the south end of, I'll call it the lacrosse field. Okay, so at the freshman camp, right here, out here at the lacrosse field, on the south end, it was slated to be a storage shed, not really a shed, a storage building, but it was gonna be similar to what you'd see, around the district, with the brick and the facade and really, spend some money on it. It was cut from the project, but we feel that there's a dire need to have some storage, in the district. Not that we hoard everything, but you can imagine when we went into the COVID conversation, we went from desks to tables and then tables to desks, and we've been doing that, so they're storing a lot of things. And if Lee was here, he'd probably be begging for a storage unit, but we've really tried to, I would say, slim this down.
Value engineering.
Yes, yes. Besides building it ourselves with wood and extension cords, we are trying to make this usable facility with power. We're not adding water. Are we adding water on the outside? Yeah, but not like a restroom or anything in there. We're simply just trying to add a storage unit. The location, we're still having some conversation, is right here. Is it in this graphic? Oh, we're still working on the location. The location will be, the plan is right now is to have it near the softball field, which is back behind where we're sitting. I could open the screen and point where it is. That's hard. So we're just trying to determine, does it go on the other, which side of the tree line does it go on? And that's a deeper conversation, primarily because we're trying to look at the other side of the tree line. If we put any additional facilities back there, we don't want this to get in the way, and we definitely don't want to move this in 5 years, going from there. So, something that is definitely needed.
Seems like if I recall when we talked about this and then tabled it, and the rest of you that were here, part of it was because we weren't sure whether or not there needed to be additional restroom facilities and or concession stand, depending on how this field was used. So I guess in conjunction with deciding where to put this, if that is still an addable option at some point or a need, you know, thinking about taking that into consideration as to how close we put it, either to the back or this way.
That's a great, I didn't know that. That's a great point. The original plan was to put it on the, I would say, the north side of the service road. This is to put it on the south side of the service road. So the need for restrooms, concessions, any of those things, that would be a separate conversation with the turf field.
Okay.
This is simply, we would put this in with a gravel road to get up there to store things and get at it whenever needed. But that's a great point. This is on the other side of the service road. Regardless if it's on there's a tree line there, you'll see there's a little bit of a pond there. It's gonna go on one side of that tree line. Did I summarize that right?
You did great. Just the team, to the team's credit, they've taken over $200,000 out of the cost. Just from the block, just those construction methods. This is more, it's not a straight up pole barn, but it's not something that you would put, it's not as presentable as something you put out there on a crossfit.
And if I recall, we ran into a money crunch, didn't we?
It was, the cost of it, if I remember right, was over 3 times what you're showing here. And it was because it had restrooms inside of it, and a brick facade, and it wasn't this building, which I applaud you for doing this. I think is the right thing to do. The only concern I have, if we put it to the south side, don't we have drainage issues back there that would make it difficult?
Yeah, Ben's talked about some water retention, and we have a water retention pond right there. It's not like it has, so there'll be some things that have to be addressed, but it's about the only space we have left to work with.
There's a lot of discussion about that part of the campus. We've got a softball field that's used for PE classes, but do we want to do something different in that area regarding maybe long-term?
Yep.
There's also conversations, do we ever want to, in the future, connect the bus loop to the high school parking lot on the other side of Buttermilk Creek? And that's a different conversation. That is not in the scope. That is a deeper conversation. But so it's hard to try to figure out where to put something where 10 years from now you don't wanna move it, so.
What about the potential pathway that we've been talking about with the city? Where is that supposed to fall in conjunction with?
That's farther west. It goes along the back end of the softball field, and then it directly cuts farther west, right along the bus garage, kind of. It crosses the road farther west. This would not impact that non-motorized pathway. However, if we want to do a different facility back there, then we might have to figure that out. I know, we talked a lot about it.
Because the one concern I have is we do this to save on the cost of the construction of the building, and we spend that much on site work.
Yeah. Yeah. I think if we put it on the other side of the tree line, we won't spend as much money on site work, but there are some low-lying areas there, and I've got Bryce and Luke are smiling back there thinking about underwater storage, which I refuse to spend money on underwater storage.
So a little more investigation to go on here relative to site and so forth, but again, we want to bring this to March 10th.
Yeah, it sounds like I'm hearing that the idea is, let's figure out the location and then go from there.
Okay, good. Next up, Michigan Integrated Continuous Improvement Process. Amy, we're back to you.
Back to me, yes, and I will invite instructional coaches to join at this point. Feel free to come on up. My initial presentation will go into some other data that we want to share this evening. So I am going to go ahead and share. Dr. Vanderjack, I did share this presentation with you because my computer is showing me I have 37%.
Well, how high are you going to go?
Well, I don't know, but we're on a roll tonight, so.
I am pulling it up right now.
Okay, I'll project until
I got it.
I can't anymore. Okay. Okay. All right. Let's see. So, Michigan Integrated Continuous Improvement Process, another acronym called MICIP in the world of education. And really, just wanted to give you an overview. It's been something in the works for the last couple of years, but because of COVID, for varying reasons, districts are in varying stages of implementation. Even the state has paused some of their projected rollout of the integration of systems. So tonight is really just a brief overview of what it is, why I'm talking about it, and then I want to return to some academic data because a piece of this is integral to a lot of the work that we are currently doing, but then also how we move forward to address some unfinished learning connected to COVID and the new positions and so forth. So in my world, all of these things go together, and I try hard to make sure that I'm creating a picture of how they do fit, and so that's the hope for this evening. So Michigan Integrated Continuous Improvement Process, you can go to the next slide. Really, what is it? And so overall, our school improvement processes have been very linear in the past. They tend to be something that the district as well as buildings go through once a year, and then it gets put on the shelf and everybody kind of forgets about what was in the plan and what are we supposed to do and what are our goals and so forth. And so really the attempt by Michigan Department of Education is to create a system that is meaningful as well as really addresses the whole child as well. So you'll see that mindset is here. I'll discuss that in a moment. Also process, so looking at the process to make sure that it's meaningful is really that continuous improvement component of what they're asking us to do, as well as then a platform change. So there's been lots of platform changes at the state level in the last couple of years, which are interesting. So the platforms are where we enter reports or grants and all of that. So this is a new platform change. In an ideal world, this platform will overlap with a grant system platform. And so that also has to do with process, that what do we identify first? Are we identifying here's the pot of money, and then what needs do we have, or are we identifying student needs and then finding the money? So those two systems, both a financial or funding platform as well as the platform where we input what our district goals are and building goals are. So those are the three big components of MICIP. And really the overall outcomes of MICIP are really just in hopes that students, we're creating those equitable opportunities for healthy, safe, engaged, challenged, supported, all those words that we know are really critical to our learning environments and student success. It's a continuous improvement process, so again, it's not a one and done, it's really that, what are our needs, what are our programs, how are we monitoring it, how are we evaluating it, and it's just that continuous improvement, so developing what those systems look like in a district. As well as then also that integrated rather than isolated, so instead of siloing those goals, really ensuring that we have integration of all of the programs and initiatives going on in the district from all aspects, academic and otherwise. The other thing that I would note is that it really focuses on improvement targets that reflect areas that influence academic achievement rather than just academics, and that's really that mindset shift, which I'll get to in a moment. And then the systems to support high quality implementation of actions, and of course, high levels of student outcomes. And then finally, really understanding students through both needs as well as assets. We know that students come to us in all ways, with lots of needs, but sometimes also lots of assets that we are not paying enough attention to. And so those are components that we'll be paying attention to. The next slide really talks about then those components. A critical role of each piece is really that mindset, which I'll dig into in a moment, and really suggests whose voices need to be at the table, so ensuring all stakeholders have a voice in all of these areas. So continuous improvement, whole child, as well as systems thinking. I'm going to go in reverse order because we're going to land on continuous improvement. So typically you go left to right. I'm going to go in reverse order. So systems thinking, again, it's a series of interdependent, aligned processes and people. The concept really lends itself to improvements in areas across the district in projects or initiatives such as multi-tiered systems of support. So each district is identifying areas where there's system improvement needed. And so that would be an example where we're seeing that multi-tiered systems of support, we are going to be giving that some enhancement in the next couple of years through use of intentionality with supports for students, as well as supports for teachers, and then certainly those systems that are sustainable as we move forward. From a whole child perspective, the Michigan Department of Education requires districts to go through this process to consider topics under the whole child. So when you go through a comprehensive needs assessment, we're looking at things like family engagement, community involvement, physical activity, nutrition, environment and services, health services, counseling, psychological and social services, social emotional climate, all aspects of the items that we know influence academic outcomes, not just academics. So that becomes one of the outcomes of the MICIP process. I'm moving rather quickly, somewhat intentionally, so slow me down if you need to. And then finally, continuous improvement. Again, notice that in the center is the student, and then around the outside are certainly our mission, vision, and beliefs. And certainly then the process becomes around assessing needs, planning, implementing, monitoring, and evaluating, and then the process starts again. So that continuous improvement, looking for student outcomes in all areas. Again, academic as well as the list of whole child indicators that we know influence academic outcomes. So the comprehensive needs assessment part of this whole idea is really something that I want to revisit some of the data that we discussed last time we were together because you had a couple questions. But I also have some additional data from like a proficiency standpoint because there's lots of different ways that we look at data and there's really a lot to be celebrated. So I want to take a moment to do that this evening too. But this comprehensive needs assessment, we have been doing some work in the areas of what does our data tell us. Certainly we've had conversations prior to COVID, but we know that that is ongoing conversation when we're talking about any unfinished learning that our students might be engaging in, and then how do we impact that? And so when we look at our academic data, you see an item that we reviewed the last time we were together at our board meeting. This was part of our required COVID report, And this is our student growth data. So a couple of questions that were raised that evening were, gosh, I'm noticing that in 5th grade reading seems low, and then you certainly, as you dissect it further, you can say, well, 6th grade math is low. And so wanted to dive in a little bit. I had shared with you that evening that we would be meeting with our administrative team that following Thursday to dig into that, we know data can be looked at all different ways, and so what does it mean? And so the first part of that conversation really centered around, well, what is student growth percentile data? And so when we look at student growth percentile, describes a student's growth compared to other students with similar prior test scores. So, okay, right, that's one test measure, which is very different than proficiency data. So when we look at why it's important and the intent of finding student growth percentiles around our benchmark assessments, it's important to measure the student growth because it can give teachers a more nuanced understanding of student achievement that's useful for instruction. So when we look at MSTEP data as an example, that's sometimes what they call like the autopsy, right? It's too late. It's measuring end of 5th grade standards. A benchmark assessment and student growth percentiles allow us to track student growth no matter where the student comes in. Using my example of a 5th grader, no matter where I come in with knowledge and skill, it allows the teacher to 3 times a year, so we do benchmark assessments in fall, winter, and spring, to be able to say how on target is this student with mastering the 5th grade standards by the end of the year. It's a adaptive assessment, so if I get questions right, it gives me harder questions. If I get questions incorrect, it gives me easier questions, and it also gives lots of different measures. So it gives a student growth percentile. It also gives equivalent, grade level equivalent scores, which you'll hear about in a moment when instructional coaches share some data around our tutoring and intervention. So we use the data in lots of different ways. The dialogue that we had with our administrators was this is one test measure, and they certainly wanted to go back and talk with 5th grade teams about what they're seeing. We do data dialogues in the building at every grade level, and so I think that those become those deeper conversations as we drill into what are we seeing, what are we noticing, and you end up literally in data dialogues putting names to the data points, right? Pulling up Amy Taylor's data, she seems to be not meeting benchmarks. How are we going to meet the needs that she is showing us that she has some unfinished learning that we need to tend to? So again, I wanted to just kind of go back to that, share what some of the thinking was, but then also really re-identify or re-share what the real purpose of a student growth percentile is. That when we see 50%, that can sometimes feel like, ooh, are we on target, are we not on target? And really those national norms would say these are good data points for us from a student growth percentile perspective, that we have this percentage of our students making this level of gains at this point.
Amy, what tool are we using to do the assessment?
STAR Renaissance is an adaptive assessment tool that we use as a benchmark assessment.
And we're allowed to make the choice of our tool, or we were mandated what tool we had to use?
They narrow it down to a few, and STAR assessment is one on the approved list. So yes, kind of. And we've been using that 1st through 8th grade for the last 2 years. Prior to that, it was used, 1st through 3rd grade, and then it expanded up to 5th grade, and then it was in one middle school but not the other, and now we are district-wide 1st through 8th grade. And so part of those multi-tiered systems of support are those regular data dialogues where we're looking at student data, drilling down to individual students, seeing if we can at all triangulate data around individual students' needs, and not just using one data point to say Amy's on benchmark or not on benchmark, but drilling deeper to say what are my instructional needs? Can they be addressed in Tier 1 instruction within multi-tiered systems of support? Can they be addressed in Tier 2? And so forth, and then how do we monitor that, and I could keep going. I'm only a little passionate about it. The other question that really came up that I wanted to address, and that I have some additional data to share, is really around the 10th and 11th grade data, kind of a wonder around, okay, this was achievement related to academic goals, the percent of students on track for graduation. And so the 10th and 11th graders, that data looks the only word I can think of is less. It's not as high as the other grade levels, and so there was a wonder about that. When we talked with administrators, or when I talked with administrators about that, they kind of giggled and they said, well, I can give you a couple of reasons. I mean, freshmen are higher than 10th and 11th graders because they've had fewer opportunities to fail, right? And then, you know, that's kind of tongue in cheek, but there is some truth to that, that as students go up in grade, they have more opportunities to fail. My thinking then is that that's also the dialogue that we're having about how do we make sure students don't even get to that place, right? How are we intervening sooner? What are our data tools at the middle school and high school level that we're using, or the high school in particular, that we're using to make sure we have a pulse on kids' progress, and then how do we intervene when we know that they're struggling, and we're going to talk a little bit about that tonight as well. So the other pieces that they said were by the time you get to seniors, you've had lots of opportunities for credit recovery, whether that's during the day credit recovery. We are on trimesters, so that also allows students to be able to retake courses and kind of get back on track. We also offer credit recovery in the summer. So the magic wand moment, though, is to figure out how we don't have to have any student ever need credit recovery, right? That we're providing supports along the way. But again, that's my magic wand. So the other piece that I will add to that, though, is that we did notice, as we look at data, we did notice that we had a larger number of students transferring out than in years past. And so I'll attempt to explain the data that you see on the screen in front of you. So in 2020-21, you can see that there are school year transfer out. The additional piece that administrators would say, I'm going to back up for one moment, administrators would say about how that bumps back up that higher percentage of on track for graduation for our seniors is that sometimes kids transfer out, and that's what this data reflects. And that's also a concern that we need to figure out how to respond to. Our Hudsonville students deserve a place to continue learning, and we've got to figure that out. So 2021 school year transfers out, you can see the numbers by grade level and the numbers that were off track for graduation that transferred out. So by way of example, we have 10th grade on the chart on the left. We had, in the school year 2021, we had 26 transfer out. 8 of those were off track for graduation, and that was the percent that left. So that just kind of paints a picture about potentially a reason why they were leaving. When we look at first trimester of this school year, that's just one trimester's data. So overall in 2021, we had 41% of our students transfer out because they were off track for graduation. In first trimester of this school year, we had 44% transfer out. That's concerning. And so a piece that we are looking into, and quite honestly, some of the interventions that we've put in place, both with before and after school tutoring, as well as the vision for the MTSS interventionists moving forward, and a couple of the other positions that fall under that umbrella are to figure out how we come alongside students and support them during the school day, before the school day, after the school day, to not even get to a point where they're credit deficient. The other piece that I would add that we're beginning to discuss is the idea around what other options might we have to be thinking of creatively to take care of our Hudsonville Public School students and offer them varying paths to graduation. That is a sore goal, and so this is something that we're starting to pick up and explore a little bit. And so I keep asking, well, can you find this? Can we find this? Can we drill down further? Can we drill down further? And so all of the students who left in first trimester, you can see the numbers and then the percentage of students who exited and where they went. So we had 38 students leave to go to online school, 33 to go to a different school, and so forth, down the list, homeschool, parochial school, and a few who dropped out. The piece on the right that I'll draw your attention to was, of the percentage who left, 36.26% of the students transferring were in Eagle Virtual during the 2021 school year. And considering that we had just under 10% of our total high school population in Eagle Virtual, that's a significant number of students. And so we think that that's starting to tell us that online learning does appeal to some of our students for any number of reasons. And those are some of the pieces that we'll continue to explore as we dive into our SOAR goal around varying pathways for graduation. So looking at short term around interventions and what does that look like? How are we supporting students so they don't get to the point of being credit deficient? And then what are some long-term solutions that we may need to dig in with a larger group of stakeholders of parents and students and administrators and teachers to say, what might this look like? And there's models out there that surrounding districts are currently finding success with, so there's lots to learn from others as well. So academic data, this is the celebration portion of the evening. I'll go through this again briefly, but when we look at this particular group of data that I'm going to share with you, IDEX, which is a platform that we use to gather data in various meaningful ways. Again, we can look at data in all kinds of ways.
Amy, I'm sorry, but can I interrupt? If you go back one slide.
Yeah.
So again, all of this is really interesting data. We know where did they go. Do we have any inclination of why did they go?
We don't necessarily. A large part of them, so if you go back to the other slide,
Yeah, it kind
they're
of points
credit
to that.
deficient,
Yeah, it
right?
points to
And
that,
so
yeah.
they're seeking our graduation requirements
Yeah.
are a bit different than
Yeah.
surrounding districts as well. And
Yeah.
so I think that
That certainly points to it, yeah.
It
Points to a
does.
substantial proportion of it.
right, I think there's some conclusions that can be
The
drawn.
others, I mean, drop out difference to some, so,
I
okay.
think in years past, you would see similar data outside of the online school option, which didn't truly exist to the caliber that it does now
Correct.
because of COVID. But in years past, and we've looked at some numbers in the past, that our rates are fairly consistent with, people moving in, people moving out, people making different choices for whether to be on track for graduation or not.
So, and this is, it's just a wonder,
Yeah.
and we don't have to get into it, but one is if we know if it's associated with an address change, like if they
Mhm.
physically moved out of the district. And then the other is for students moving into the district, the transfers in, do we have any understanding of where they stand on, in regards to readiness for
Pathways for
graduation?
graduation.
So,
Yeah, that's a
do we
good
have
question.
students that are transferring in who are coming in really not on track, that we're then working to get them on track?
Kind of the same desire maybe some of our kids have leaving, some are coming here.
The other thing I think might be a little curious, out of those different public schools, are part of those potentially alternative ed schools too?
We do have specific locations of where they went. Some are address changes, some are districts in surrounding areas. So, yeah, we do have that data that we could drill down even further. Those were just kind of the summary of the places that we went. So the peer groups that you'll see, the peer group data is really a set of data that I'm going to then share the proficiency, some celebration data. But I want to describe the peer group first. So IDEX identifies the peer group comparison data that all have similar student counts as well as free and reduced percentages within their district. So these are the comparable districts on the following slides of the data. So 3rd through 8th grade, all subjects. The top graph shows how our students have performed on MSTEP in each content area over time. You can see that it gives us a trend data from 2015 to 2021. Blue is ELA, math is green, science is yellow, and social studies is red. The graph below then shows us how students have performed in each NSTEP subject compared to the average of the peer group. So that list of districts on the previous slide. And represented by the 0 line is our peer groups. So we don't see any of their data on the slide because we're performing above them, if that makes sense. So that's to be celebrated. We are outperforming our peers. So the data points below the 0.0% line represent underperformance, and we're not also there. So again, blue is ELA, green is math, science, and social studies. So we are outperforming all of our peer groups, similarly by size as well as grade groups.
And this was data compiled from this past year, is that what I'm sorry?
It's actually trend data, so it's all the way from
Oh, I'm sorry.
2015. That's
Gotcha.
okay. There's a lot to absorb on there. I get it. 2015 to 2021.
I think it's very interesting to obviously note from 2019 to 2021, when you look at what happened across the whole world, it's clearly an impact all the way around.
Yes, definitely. I think even when you go to, there's a slide coming up where it does compare, I think it's this one here. So the chart on the left here shows our district highlighted in bold at the top of the chart. This is a snapshot of overall proficiency for the 2021 test year, which again is to be celebrated. And the graph on the right compares Hudsonville Public Schools' overall proficiency over time to that of our peers in all Michigan districts. Blue is Hudsonville, green is the peer group, and yellow is all districts in Michigan. So again, lots to be celebrated.
One thing that is not represented here is the percent of students that were assessed. There's thresholds in how the volume of who you test, and not all districts tested all of their students based on who was, their students in person, most of them tested, but those that were remote, they may not have. I can vouch for Hudsonville that we maintain the same standards to test all of our students.
That would be just for the 2021 school
Correct.
year. There's no
The last piece of data on that screen where you see the blue, green, and yellow.
And then on the next slide shows our overall SAT scores that shows performance as measured by average SAT scores. Hudsonville is blue, peer group is green, and Michigan districts are reflected in yellow. So again, lots to be celebrated in regard to our student performance, not only in 2021, but certainly that trend, it continues for Hudsonville Public School students. The last slide, what's next? Celebrate, right? I think that in education, oftentimes we don't take the time to celebrate the performance that our students are achieving under our teachers' care. And so I think that that is a really important piece of any data, is to find what the celebrations are. I think that the last comment that is there is and it's even a typo, every student, every day, is also kind of part of my motto, that until we're, 100%, there's work to be done. And so it is important to celebrate, but it's also important to move forward with ensuring we're meeting all students' needs. That's our mission. So on that note, we'll transition into, I think I shared this one with you too. Jack, no?
You shared it with me, but that was in a meeting.
I didn't just share it with you a little bit ago?
Oh, you might have, I haven't.
When my computer was gonna die, I think I shared it with you, or to you.
Yep, it's here.
Okay,
Which one's first?
It would be the tutoring, that's the one. So, back to the every student, every day, it's really the idea around how are we identifying students who may need additional supports or intervention, and what are those interventions look like. And I have a team of phenomenal educators here sitting to my left that year ago, we were looking at our data, and although our data review last year at this time really indicated only a 5 to 10% decrease in performance from previous years, we did want to respond to the data in meaningful ways. And so it was last year at this time we intentionally decided to proceed with researching and building a before and after school program, as well as enhancing some of our middle school intervention courses to deal with any unfinished learning, whether it was from COVID or not from COVID. At this point, it doesn't matter, right? It just is data and students that we're aware of that need something more, and we want to provide that for them. So I really am going to turn it over to these ladies who really have been working for the past year to develop a pretty phenomenal program that we're super excited about where we are now and where we see it going as we move forward. So.
All right, we'll move forward maybe a couple slides. One more. That's what, thank you. So we wanted to make sure when we began thinking about the tutoring program that we wanted to attend to the data. And so we've highlighted a few pieces of data here that we really kept in mind as we envisioned our tutoring program. The first one says that rigorous research provides strong evidence that high dosage tutoring can produce large learning gains for a wide range of students, including those who have fallen behind academically. And then the most effective tutoring interventions, this makes it high dosage, involve 3 or more sessions per week, with sessions that last for about 30 to 60 minutes per day. Studies have found little evidence that once-a-week tutoring is sufficient to generate meaningful growth. Also, ensuring students have a consistent tutor over time may facilitate positive student-tutor relationships and a stronger understanding of a student's learning needs. And then finally, using high-quality instructional materials that are aligned with classroom content allows tutors to reinforce and support teachers' classroom instruction.
Go ahead. So taking that research into consideration, we were looking at different curriculum options, and for reading, we went ahead with the Teachers College Reading and Writing Project high dosage tutoring curriculum that they produced right at the end of the summer, so just in the nick of time for us to use. And that has 3 different pathways, and one of them focuses on foundational skills, and the other 2 focus on comprehension, nonfiction, and fiction. We use that with our 1st through 6th grade reading students. And then we also found that we had some upper elementary and into middle school kids who had some holes in areas of those foundational skills, but the foundational pathway was a little bit too young for them. So we supplemented that with the intensive phonemic awareness and phonics instruction that's also from Teachers College, right? And we use that with 4th through 6th grade. For math, we're using the Delta Math Interventions, and that's run out of the Ottawa area ISD. And we've used that first through all the way through algebra in high school. And then we also have some tutors who are just supporting content, classroom content. That's mostly the secondary.
All right, we have just completed our 2nd session, and so you can see here the dates of our sessions as well as the 40-minute sessions for each time that we meet with our tutors. We are launching session 3 this next week, Monday, for our final session, and yeah, we're excited to get going with everything.
So at the very beginning of the year, we needed to identify which students were going to be invited into the tutoring session, the first one. And it was very close to the start of the school year, so we had to figure out what would be the determining factor of who was invited. So we used our benchmark data from the very beginning of the year, which was our STAR reading and our STAR math assessments. We also took into consideration our FMP reading running record information. And then we gave the Delta Math Screener to any students in the middle school or high school that we were concerned about potentially needing the intervention. And then used teacher recommendation. So that was our first session. And then after we completed that first session, we learned a lot. And one of the things that we were really focused on for the 2nd session was to make sure that our groups were a little bit more focused on like needs. So, we took tutor recommendations for any students that the tutors recommended continue on in tutoring. And then also teacher recommendation, they'd known their kids for 3 or 4 months at that point, so they knew a lot more about their kids and who might need support. And then Kathy and I went around the district and met with any of the kids that were on the recommended list and gave them one of the 2 assessments, either the foundational reading assessment or the Delta Math Trainer. And that way we could take that data and group the kids into groups of students who had needs that were similar to theirs. Okay, yeah, that's right. So then we are continuing on with those groups into session 3 that starts next week. We had to do a little bit of supplementing because some kids couldn't continue on for the 3rd session because spring sports or different schedules that got them out of it. But.
Can I ask a quick question before we go on? Are all of those students then doing the 3 sessions of, okay. And then if a parent contacted the teacher or the principal and said, hey, I heard they're doing this tutoring, can my child go? What was your process for that?
We still look at the assessments. We have noticed that it's contagious.
Like
over time, we have had a lot more people reach out, and
Yeah.
so the principals have fielded a lot of that, and whether we have spots for them, existing spots for them, and whether we have tutors. But we have been receptive to that.
Okay, great. Well, and I appreciate the fact then when it comes down to it, you have to go back to the data. Otherwise, again,
Yeah.
you don't want to upset the apple cart.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We've also been able to provide transportation, which is exciting. At the middle and high school level, identified students are given the option to have transportation from designated locations to school for 7 a.m. tutoring time. We do have some after-school tutoring happening at the middle and high school as well, and that parents are doing pickups for that part. For elementary, identified students are given the option to have transportation from school directly to their home at 4:35 p.m. We have a lot of elementary students taking this at home.
Okay, so data-wise, our first session, we had 25 reading tutors and 16 math tutors. And you can see the breakdown of students per grade. But we were able to service 121 students for that first session. The next slide will show session 2. So we gained tutors in the second session. We don't have the exact data for session 3 because it's still changing day by day right now, but we have at least 5 or 6 more tutors than we had in the second session. So we are continuing to be able to grow. And if you go to the next one, so we took our STAR reading and math data from the very beginning of the year, and then the students take their benchmark assessment in the winter again. So we were able to take that same reading and math data from the winter STAR and break it apart. So we were able to take, for reading, all 1st through 6th grade students in the district. We pulled out the students who were tutored and kept them into tutoring groups to be able to calculate their growth. And we looked at, on the STAR reading assessment, we looked at the grade equivalency. So what that is when a student takes the test and they break down their data, they give them a score for where they would fall grade-wise for how they performed. So let's say that there was a student who got a 1.7, that would say their 1st grade 7 months into 1st grade. So if at the beginning of the year they took that and scored 1.7, and then in the winter they took it again and they scored a 2.5, we calculated the growth, any positive growth we calculated, and there were, out of all of our tutoring kiddos, 83% of them showed any positive growth. And from the rest of the district, 72%. So they were outperforming our district. The non-tutor, yeah. And then we went even further and looked at that growth data to see how they did beyond half a year's growth, so 0.5 or above. And 57% of our tutoring students were able to show greater than a half a year's growth, while the rest of the district, it was 47% showed that much growth. And then we went even further and looked for greater than a year's growth. And 28% of our tutoring students were able to show greater than a year's growth, within that first session, while the rest of the district showed 23% at that level. So that was good. We were really happy about that. The next slide shows the same data, but this time for our math students. And we had similar impressive results from our math tutoring.
Can I ask you a question? This is fantastic. From an overall performance perspective, and I don't know how you measure the data, but assuming, and this is just an assumption, that the tutored students were starting from a point further behind the average student, the data would say we've closed the gap. And I think the question would be, how much of a gap remains? Like, did the tutored students on average catch up to the gap, or how much of that gap closed so that ultimately what looks phenomenal is that, one, the program works, and two, you're helping them catch up to peers in the classroom, so that at that point, hopefully the whole classroom can move forward at a more accelerated rate as
Right.
well.
Yeah, that's a good question. When we look at our reading and math star data, there's lots of different ways that it's broken down. We use the grade equivalency, but there are other options. So I wonder if we're continually thinking about what is the best way to measure this. So that will be something that will be interesting to take into consideration next time too.
Who becomes tutors, or how do they become a tutor? Or what's that process for that?
That's a great question.
Yeah, so we started with our first session with, I would say 99% certified teachers and paras. We since have included non-certified paras as well in session 2 and session 3. So they are the makeup of our tutoring crew.
And then they all go through training in whichever, if they're doing, whichever curriculum they have, there's training for that they have to complete before they can do their tutoring.
The research really suggests a certified teacher being the optimal person to provide the high dosage tutoring. However, as we got into the resources that we're using and knowing the caliber of the para support that we have in the buildings and how they're supporting students already, it was just seamless for us to provide that level of training for them to be able to step right in and do a fantastic job.
And kudos to them. I'm assuming it's something where they step up and say, hey, I want to be part of this.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's all volunteer. I mean, we do pay them, but.
Right, but they volunteered to
With
do the
COVID relief funds.
after the academy, so yes, thank them.
Yes.
Clearly, this is a good thing.
Is there a question? I thought I heard some.
No, that answered my question.
Okay.
So speaking of our tutors, we have asked for some feedback, and I just pulled, we've had lots of feedback and lots of quotes from our tutors, but here are some samples. So in regard to reading, my students are becoming more confident in their reading. I've gotten positive feedback from parents. My students are already showing improvement in fluency, comprehension through discussion, and word work. We have gotten to know the kids well, and we have relationships with the students. The students really seem to enjoy the time and are carrying over things session to session. The kids enjoy coming. I think that is a huge celebration. It's after school, right? And then some math comments are as follows. All students feel they have improved and are taking pride in their graph and chart of progress. The connection that I'm making with these students is carrying over into other subject areas. They are feeling more confident with less meltdowns in class. My tutoring students have moved from 0 on the first quick quiz to getting 5 or 6 at the end of the 3-day teaching time. The girls in my group have begun participating in the regular classroom math conversation and are gaining confidence.
So next steps, just like you were talking about, we are looking at, now that we've got, our last session of tutoring ended last week, and we had everybody do a post-assessment. So we are looking at gathering that data to see what comparison growth we can look at too. And then just continuing to see what we can do to get the best idea of what results we're getting from the tutoring. And our third session starts next week, runs through the end of April. The Teachers College curriculum that we're using for reading is partnered up with a company called Litera, and Litera is the platform that we are able to access the curriculum through. And they were a brand new company that started with this tutoring curriculum in August. So we were, I think, their very first customer. And they have been incredibly supportive and helpful as we've worked through this. And to that end, they are running a case study on our tutoring program in Hudsonville. And we're in the process of working through that with them to see what information they can gather too. And then
I'm gonna stop you there. So Kathy and Sarah were invited to be part of a webinar with Lucy Calkins, who is the writer of the unit study of the Teachers College in New York. And so they literally were elbow to elbow on a virtual, on a screen with Lucy Calkins, really highlighting the work that we are doing here in Hudsonville. And all three of these ladies deserve a huge shout out.
Awesome.
How did you find the Litera program?
Oh, Litera?
Or Litera,
Yeah, it's a little bit of a story. So, knowing that we were following the research about high dosage tutoring and starting to look what was available, I took a course through Teachers College on some tutoring curriculum that they had. And then when I went to go back to it in August, because I was going to use it to train the teachers, it had disappeared. And so we were a little worried. Yeah. And so I kept pushing on Teachers College, but they just kept feeding me a line that they couldn't say anything. But basically they were partnering at that time with Litera around the tutoring curriculum. And so I knew from the course that I had taken that it was strong. Really encouraged about the foundational reading, explicit instruction that was included. And so for us, it became like a natural thing. And Litera was along for the ride. And what we've learned from our tutors throughout this is how those foundational skills, the lessons that the tutors are working through with these students, are so beneficial that a lot of our or a handful of our tutors have made comments to us about how they are taking some of that tutoring curriculum and using it in the classroom with their students because they see how beneficial it is with their tutoring students. So knowing that, we're looking ahead at summer school and wondering if there's any way that we can take what we've already learned about this tutoring curriculum and use it in some form with our summer school program. So we're still figuring that out, but we're hopeful. All right.
I'm going to move into kind of our middle school makeover emotional intervention classes, but first, these two are the tutoring experts, so are there any other questions for them? I don't want to steal their thunder. Good? All right. So middle school interventions, this is more of kind of a makeover of an existing program. We had some existing exploratory classes, so these were kind of our extra elective classes that were designed for maybe students who needed a little extra support for their math and ELA classes. But what we found over time is that teachers were being kind of assigned these classes, but they were given very little like tools or instructions, just kind of like, hey, here's some kids who struggle with math and ELA, like try to work on some basic skills. So last year we kind of had a brainstorm, like what if we spent a little bit of our time thinking about how to make those classes over and make them more meaningful. It was a cost neutral move, really just to provide those teachers with more resources so that they could target those needs a little bit more as well. So what we moved to is we really wanted to focus, oftentimes we talk in, when working with students who have some unfinished learning about filling buckets or plugging the holes. If you think of a bucket, so if you take a bucket with holes in it and you keep pouring water in, you might be able to get some water eventually, but it's going to keep going out the end. So how can we focus more instead in these classes on really filling those holes? So how can we target the areas that students are lacking? So in the past, there was these classes were called Lit Lab and Math Matters, and there was kind of a group of 6th, 7th, and 8th graders that might be in there. And after doing some looking at research, we found that really we get the most bang for our buck. We focus in on 6th graders because we find that transition from from the elementary to middle school is hard. You're going from 1 or 2 teachers who are there all day with you to this bigger building with 6 teachers. Often we have more instructional minutes in math and ELA in elementary, and then we go to kind of a standard like 55 or 60 when you get to middle school. So we zeroed in on really some 6th graders who felt like could use some extra help. I will say that there was room in the schedule for Baldwin Street to add 1 extra math intervention class, which they did at 7th grade, and there was room. Riley's been able to kind of do like a 7th and 8th grade on and off with some literacy intervention too, but we spent most of our time in the 6th grade this year. So a little bit like the tutoring, we spent some time talking with the counseling department and the principals and teachers about how we could get some recommendations from prior teachers, so 5th grade teachers, looking at spring MICIP scores, STAR benchmark scores. We have in our school data, we have historical data on all of our students, their grades in the ELA and math class, and then we have some students and parents who simply just ask, like, could I please get a little extra help? So we focus on those students. And then something else that we're focused on, which kind of helps us get ready for these NPSS coordinators, if you go to the next slide, is data dialogues. So these often happen at the elementary school, but we're still kind of, we have our training wheels a little bit on in secondary when it comes to data dialogues in terms of pulling these meetings together. So we've been holding quarterly data dialogues just for these classes, in which we have a full room of teachers, counselors, principals, and myself, and then we put a spreadsheet together and really look at these students, their progress. So we're progress monitoring, looking at state assessments, benchmark assessments, also the formative assessments along the way, as well as behavior and attendance. And one of the cool things that's happened too is the teachers have started to include the students in some of that gathering of data, having a private conference with them, asking like, is this class helping you? What do you think of it? They have them fill out surveys, and they've really been asking the students what they think, which is great as they move up in their educational career to kind of become advocates for themselves. And the purpose of those meetings really is to analyze and discuss data. We also think about students who may be needing to move out of the class. Maybe they're making great, we've had a couple students who are making such great progress that they're ready to move out. There's a couple that simply, like, they really want an art class, right, 1 quarter or that kind of thing. And then we're able to talk about student progress, but then also we have great conversations about like trends in terms of the instruction. And once again, like with the tutoring, teachers are saying, oh, I should bring this back to my normal, or my usual math class or my other ELA class. So as of January, when I pulled this data, all students in those intervention courses were passed.
One quick question, so if I understood correctly, the data dialogues are occurring at both Baldwin and Riley,
Yeah,
correct?
they are.
Okay.
Yep.
There's different levels of, the program is at different levels.
Yeah, we have it
But-
both buildings 6th grade, but Riley was able to find a little extra room for
Yes.
a couple,
Yeah,
yeah.
but the dialogues are occurring.
Yeah, they are,
Okay, good.
yep. As of January, every student in the course were passing their general ed math and ELA classes, and 55% were actually getting an A or B in their math and English classes. And then we saw 53% of students increase in their percentile rank in the fall to winter STAR benchmark assessment. So many of the students are at a lower percentile rank, and there's also, I'm going to get to this in a minute, but a lot of students who have felt they haven't enjoyed those classes in the past, right? So a lot of it has been coaching and teaching and just kind of loving on them a little bit extra as well. So some of our feedback, what the teachers have told me is they love just building those relationships with students, especially those who may not always enjoy school. They're connecting students to authors or reading topics and vocab. They're able to kind of pre-teach some difficult concepts so that the students feel kind of ahead of the game when they get there in class. Because there's smaller numbers as well, they're able to adjust the instruction really easily in that class with students' lack of understanding. They're closing gaps in skills. The students, that student reflection I spoke of, students really have a voice in understanding their progress. The teachers are talking to them about the progress that they're making. They're helping them set goals. And then we're seeing some growing confidence and success. Room to grow. The teachers are of course begging that they wish we had this class at every 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. Right now our scheduling allows us to focus mainly on 6th graders, that was honestly a hard conversation to say, like, I know that we've always included all of these 6th, 7th, 8th, can we really just focus on this group of 6th graders to try to make more progress, because we weren't seeing great progress from that mixed class of grade levels. We hope to use our new MTSS building interventionists to improve our ability to use data to drill down to the missing scales and fill gaps. We're also using, as PBAIS gets going at the middle schools, there's a lot of times, like, it's that chicken or the egg thing, like, is the behavior because of the academics or the academics because of behavior? So we're really kind of zeroing in on that as well. And then we are continuing to think about how we're finding those students, and then that ongoing data dialogue to really use our data to drill down, not to just what their needs are, but then how to fill those needs and how to find better ideas for the intervention. So that's the middle school intervention makeover.
It's kind of interesting that it circles back a little bit to what we talked at the very beginning, and kind of to Mark's point about the importance of a relationship between a teacher and a student, and how these tutors are stepping in the gap. And definitely one of those wonders will be, what do we see as a correlation somewhat to the overall behaviors? Obviously, you know, all these pieces and parts will be working together, but I can see that the impact potential in tutoring venue would definitely be helpful for some of those potential problems too.
Do you think we've learned things from this, especially when you said, you know, you focused on the 6th graders to start with, how we might refocus the 5-6 building and what that might look like based on what you're learning from this?
Yes, I think there's huge potential in 5-6 building, especially because we know, looking at data, we often have those gaps from building to building. And so just being able to go from hopefully 5 to 6 teachers to maybe like 3 or 4, like just to slowly begin that process of, you know, working with different teachers, having to organize your agenda, keep track of multiple assignments in different rooms. So I'm really excited with the 5-6 building and how we can not just use some of this, but then also just the very setup of the building, I think, will lend itself well to those middle school transitional years.
There'll be some challenges, because we have a different environment in the south end of the district, and we want to maintain consistency. And those are, you know, we're having conversations with 4 extremely talented young ladies before us that I think are really doing some amazing work, and that's just nice to be involved with this group to say, okay, let's meet those challenges head on and see if we can prepare our kids for every next step.
Yep.
This is, I mean, Pat, no offense, this is way more interesting to talk about water for that. I mean, there's water heaters, but then there's this. I mean, the data breakdown, the explanation of that, the tutoring program, the middle school, all really, really great to get an update on all this. And look at the data and look how the data is driving these programs and where we're trying to go and how we're trying to improve the performance of our students. So just so much great information here this evening. I really appreciate this update. I know we made you stick around for 3 hours to do it, but this was really, really, I found it fascinating. Other comments from the board?
That's good stuff.
Yeah. We look forward to continued updates if we could. This is really good stuff. And
Look forward to continuing the work for sure.
Yes.
Don't leave yet, we still have policy on the agenda. Who doesn't like policy? I'll feel offended if you think my policy is not written in pads. It's in our waters.
I'll fill you in on all things policy.
We'll leave that up to them.
Okay, thank you again, and thank you for staying here with us for so long. Okay, we now move on to employee incentive.
Yeah, so we've had conversations to some degree. Our staff, top to bottom, has moved mountains, as you saw from the presentation here. You've heard from several conversations regarding the what's taking place in our district the last 23 months. Our attendance rates are back to where they were pre-COVID. We're seeing just some positive things. Tomorrow is March 1. March the first day that some of the plexiglass can come down in the offices. Our parents are starting to come back in. Our volunteer our volunteer requirements are changing so that we're starting to get back to really some normalcy, which is exciting. But we also know our staff has really worked hard throughout this, not just dealing with the academic challenges, the online requirements, and learning a new system with Google Classroom that they hadn't used, and providing environments when we go remote or filling in for people, all the different components. We would like to recommend to the board that we reward the work that they've done. We do know in the governor's budget, there is some staff retention money that they're earmarked. That would go into effect next year and the next 4 years, which causes obviously concerns in 4 years. It's going to be kind of everybody's going to leave in 4 years. What does that look like? But this is for work that has been done. We talked about maybe something around the end of the year. We had the ETS that was coming out, which we were concerned about with the requirements regarding whether or not you had to be vaccinated or not, to wear a mask, and all of those. That obviously went to the wayside, which we were very thankful for, just because the added stress it's going to cause everybody. This is a proposal that we'd like to bring to the board next week, Thursday, to reward them for the work that they've done. We have had some preliminary conversations with the Teachers Association regarding this. This is for all employees. This is not just for our teachers. They obviously wanted to provide feedback, and I said this is a conversation the board needs to have first, and then go from there. So you kind of see the layout of what this looks like. Some of this money, I would say, is ESSER eligible, but please keep in mind, we've used a lot of our ESSER dollars to supplant work that we're already doing, which allowed our foundation balance to grow because of the money that was reallocated. So this would mostly, you could say, come out of operation, which would still keep our fund balance higher than it was a year ago, and go from there. I laid out a little bit of the plan. I can tell you the total cost is just over $1 million. And that covers every employee in the district to some degree based on full-time, part-time in the scope. The number that was provided truly is a number that when you take out taxes for the average employee, it roughly is about $1,000, right? I mean, some are going to be like $998, some are $1,002. It's right in that area. That's why if it looks like a random number, it's truly a targeted number to give you an idea. If we bring this to the board, I want to get feedback tonight so that we can bring this on March 10th. If this were approved by the board, we would then, it would be right before spring break. It's kind of a appreciation to all of our staff on behalf of, I would say, the Board of Education for the work that they've done. That's a 3-minute.
Is this retroactive to?
Yeah, it absolutely. When was your last year of work? There, we'll go right back to that. And just to be clear, we did an incentive for transportation based on the struggle, and we still are looking for bus drivers. So, you're welcome to drive. But they would be included in this also. This is not, it was the same thing with them where they've all worked hard too. Theirs was more of a retention, and we're looking at this as an appreciation, but also retention to say, listen, we appreciate what you do. That's a good idea.
And I think you said neighboring districts or others have looked at something like this.
Others have. I can tell you, I spoke with my colleague in Forest Hills, Dan Bean. Talked to him about the one that they did right around Christmas. He said it really, it was really a nice gesture. Some have worked it into contract language. I don't know of many others that have done something like this and what you call neighboring districts. But there's been discussion amongst other unions, and I'm sure if this were to come on March 10th, I'm sure there'll be other districts having more conversation about what's happening. I don't know, West Ottawa did something similar, but it was tied to contract too. So, yeah.
I like it. I support it. I appreciate that this year's budget allows us the flexibility to do this that might not be available in future years.
And I'm also encouraged by that if we do something like this for what they have done, and if we can get the House and the Senate to come up with something similar to maybe what the governor's proposing, along teacher retention lines, maybe there's this that education is actually a field people want to go into and say, listen, we appreciate what you do.
We have good, strong consensus.
Okay, we'll bring this on the 10th and go from there.
Good. All right, staff contract and renewal.
Yeah, so just I just want to clarify that we have high expectations for our students, we have high expectations for our staff. Every once in a while, we maybe have staff that are not to the expectations that we have from a Hudsonville Public Schools standpoint. Because of that, we have timelines that we have to meet, and I'm just here to share the timelines with you tonight. We have a couple staff members that we're working with that might they might choose to leave the district, or we would then potentially non-renew. If we do, we have to notify them by April 1, which would be 60 days prior to the expiration of their contract. At that point, we would notify them, and then we'd have to bring it to the board for action at the April board meeting. A lot could happen between the notification on April 1 and the board meeting, just to be very transparent. But I think it's important for the board to know that we continue to have high expectations for our staff, and we're going to make sure that our kids have teachers in front of them that we would want our kids to be in front of. So I want to give you the timeline. I'm not going to give names. Primarily, I wouldn't give names anyway in a public meeting without them being present and asking for that information. But if we have to bring that, that'll be in a consent agenda item at the April board meeting. Or it could very well be resignations. We'll have retirements that are coming in. We have retirements coming throughout the district. A handful of those that'll come through, and all of that will come through to the April board meeting, or May for some additional retirements.
So these are all teachers that are 4 years or less in their tenure process?
That is correct. Yep, that is correct. One is 1 year in, one is 2 years in. Anne would be here tonight. Unfortunately, the doctor will not allow her to be here tonight. She's not feeling great, so we'd rather her not be here, with all due respect.
The questions on contract renewal, non-renewal? Okay, last, but certainly not least, is
Policy.
revision.
All right, here we go. So we have, I have to go through, I want to go through all of these. I'm gonna do them fairly. Some of them will go faster than others. The first policy is actually it's a board bylaw. When you look at anything in the 100s, they're bylaws for the board. This is just the change in the revised definitions of what we use, because we actually have guidelines, policies, and bylaws are all set and on our website. That's a change on there. And then if you look on the second page, when it comes to personal communication devices, I don't know how many of you use pagers or beepers, but it's probably time to clean that up. And then voting on the third page really is a change based on whatever's permitted by law, because as you've witnessed in the last year, that has changed based on who can vote and when you can vote, and go from there. So that's the first. Again, these are not recommendations, these are discussions. We will bring these all to the board for a first reading on March 10th.
And these are all recommendations by Neola.
These are all recommendations by Neola with some, we personalized it for Hudsonville in some cases, and I'll try to address some of those.
Okay.
But you can see there are selections that we chose, there are language that we may have stricken from this, and these are after meeting with Neola, going from there. And I'm bringing these two as a first reading on March 10. The good news is we're going to have a whole other set of these right after the second reading, because we have our spring policy update is taking place in a couple weeks. So they're coming fast and furious. Going into the other, it's another bylaw change. It's the public participation in board meetings. We have, this policy now just mirrors what we do when it comes to board meetings, and the recommendations for all districts to update this policy, based on, how when they put public participation in their board, meetings, and how long it is, and all those different components. So that's in there. Then we go to the policies. The first policy is 3120. It's the employment of staff professionals. The highly qualified is outdated language, so most of the stricken language is all the highly qualified that has been removed. These are recent changes to the certification and licensure statutes that we have to have. So these are simply, I'm not going to say, nothing's required when it comes to board policy. These are your decisions. However, this will fall in line with what is required under Michigan law. So that's why it's in here. So really none of these are up to us. Some of the green language is what we've determined from administrative directors and certified staff. Those are ones that we filled in. And these all do report to human resources. So we put that in there. But most of that stricken language, all the red stuff, is all the outdated language that, from a policy standpoint, does not work anymore.
So Doug, it's what the state requires. Are we allowed to have a higher standard if we chose to?
We can, we definitely can. And we can, these are all policies through Neola. We could say, you know what, we want Miller Johnson to write us a policy. We want Troon to write us a policy. We want Clark Hill to write us a policy. And we can embed that. We can pull any policy, put any, but most of you'll see a lot of that when it comes to like graduation requirements, right? We have a little bit of a higher bar, and that's a good thing. But these policies are, most of these right now you'll see are just realigned with some of the practices that we have. The next policy is actually a new policy to add in here. It's 5610, and it has to do with emergency removal, suspension, expulsion of students. And I've had some conversations, I would say. I know that President Hall and I had some conversations. Our policy and our guidelines need to be cleaned up a little bit, and we found that out really after some of the Oxford situations, when we've had some student hearings regarding discipline. And the only change is if you look on the second page, this matches what our practices are and what we've done. And if you look at the stricken language and what's in green, you'll realize it contradicted itself based on the rest of the policy. Everything's been fine for everything we've done, but we think we need to clean the policy up to match what we do. And so you'll see that now it's the superintendent may suspend, and the board acts as the appeal to the decision as opposed to reverse, which is, we have these in there. All right, go to 6114. 6114 is federal funds. This is really Pat's. This is about spending. This one, 6152, 7450. The next three policies. These are really about the expenditures of federal funds. Obviously, this came to light when we had a lot of federal funds. We were used to simply getting really our only federal funds used to be Title I money. But you see a lot of money coming in with all the ESSER funds, and all the different categories there's a lot of them. So this cleans up that language. I did have Pat review all of these policies to make sure it falls in line with our finance department, our business office.
Just one question on that one for the capital expenditure requiring approval. It's a $5,000. Is that federal rule, or can we put that higher? Because that seems like a low bar to require written approval.
So I will read what this says. The drafting note has been added to the policy noting the federal threshold of $5,000 for differentiating between supplies, materials, and capital expenditures. We can make it higher.
Yes. If we can, it's just, it
seems
low to require prior approval.
I think they're just saying that anything in excess of 5, in Neola's legal opinion, if you're gonna buy with federal dollars, you gotta get prior approval in that detailed budget, if it's 5,000 or more.
Yeah, and I'm seeing a couple pieces of technology are gonna add up to more than that. And And is there any value in saying it's a $25,000 threshold before you have to have prior written approval of the federal entity that?
Yeah, we talked about this, this is their opinion of basically what's in the Federal Register. The Federal Register says if it's gonna be more than 5, you must get our prior approval. We, like our financial statement capitalization threshold is $10,000. So, Amy and I just try not to, if whatever we can not spend, on federal dollars on capital, we do. But this threshold is it's not by lot, it's by individual piece.
Okay.
So, right now, most of our technology doesn't even make our capitalization threshold, right? But good question.
Okay.
Would you like us to look and inquire what another number might be before lunchtime?
Probably mainly from the perspective of if it saves you administrative activity, by setting a higher threshold.
Yeah. Thanks.
We'll look and get some comparable data too with others that have similar policies, with districts our size, right? You can imagine
Yeah.
somebody with a $4 million budget versus an $80 million budget is gonna have a different expense. Student fees, fines, supplies, that's policy number 6152. Most of this coming through the business office. These are just authorization of payment. There is some additional language regarding the McKinney-Vento or the Homeless Act, and what that looks like for our students that may not be able to afford some fines, fees, and charges. And then the policy you were just referring to, Chad, the 7450, it's also referenced there about the $5,000 capital expenditures. We'll come back to evaluate that before we bring that back for first reading. Then we get into 8310 and 8320. Both of these are very similar policies that really have to do with participation and who can address the confidentiality of getting information out there. We can't disclose information. Proper notice of participation card is issued by the Attorney General. And it goes through kind of the content. If you look at the next policy, the pages fall in front of it.
Is this participation card? I wasn't clear on what that.
Yeah, the participation card is issued by the Attorney General under the Address Confidentiality Program Act. So it really has to do with those that have their addresses protected from the Attorney General, that have a card that removes them from we can share their information.
Okay, so that's
It's not considered directory information for that.
but that phrase participation card is a term of art that applies to that specific.
The Address Confidentiality Program Act, yeah.
Okay, that particular act.
Yep.
Okay, all right.
Good question. I can look into that more too. I'm
That's
reading
okay.
what's
That's the
here.
case- That's the case what it is.
And we've always practiced this, where when a parent says, don't release my address, they fill out the correct paperwork, and we don't do that. Similar to pictures, when we put them on social media, and from a district standpoint, we make sure that, I know Stephanie will make sure, guarantee.
Squeaky.
We've had that conversation, so, yeah. So, in 8320 is very similar, when it comes to what can and cannot be released. If you look on the back part of that, it really goes through what records can be shared and how long we have to keep them. We have to keep them for 50 years and go from there, and then, it highlights a little bit of the benefit program and the 7-year component that we have there. And then last but not least, we have 8320, which is the students' records, and this really goes into what we consider called directory information. If you look at the very last, pretty close to the last page, I can't tell what page it is. It starts with directory information. It starts listing what we would constitute directory information. We did take off, there's some that you would think, how is that directory information? We talk about maybe the height and weight of somebody on an athletic team. That gets into, quite frankly, wrestling Sometimes you do heights with basketball or volleyball, but that's also considered director information. Date of graduation, awards, honor rolls, scholarships, those are all considered director information. If released, anybody can get access to that information. Not for solicitation purposes. We've had that before, where people request information regarding this because we want to send them all a flyer about this great program that we're up in. It doesn't work that way. But when people inquire about director information, particularly the armed forces, we release that information as required.
As far as date of attendance, that removed?
Yeah, removed, you said? Yeah, there's some of that that has to do with, quite frankly, because of some of the COVID stuff, and when people are not, their attendance rates, we don't feel is really considered director information. It's not required to be in there. And so, because everybody has a different story to some degree, and we don't see where that would be relevant to a conversation regarding directory of who's here and who's not.
Just curious, in that policy, the one ad is the addition of providing district-assigned email addresses to armed forces recruiting. Is that something that's required now?
No, but we did not have district-assigned email addresses the last time we reviewed this policy, and now we do. So it's on there, should they, and that's another way for them to communicate, and that's the only really organization that we kind of work cooperatively when it comes to directory information, for various reasons. But yeah, when we last reviewed this policy, I don't know, it doesn't have a date on here. 2002, I gotta look. 2018, we did not have student email addresses, so we added it in there. That's it.
Good, okay.
I could spend more time on policy.
We'll get our first read on these on.
But I know that was more riveting than Pat's water heater, so.
So we'll get a first read on these on March 10th. So we'll
if you have questions regarding
review them
policy,
for them and let you know.
yeah, please let me know so we can. We definitely want to give you the information you need for that.
Okay, we'll do a board roundtable and then we will adjourn. Larry, do you think? All set? Steve? Good.
I'm good.
Good.
Okay. With that, can I have a motion and a second to adjourn, please? Motion by Chad. Support. Support from Steve. All in favor, say yes.
Yes.
We are adjourned. Thank you, everybody, for hanging with us on a long meeting, but a lot of good information shared. So thank you, administrative team, for prepping all this as well.